Chapter 1359. The long-armed monster immediately changed its direction, making a 90-degree turn and jumping to the side. At the same time, it punched forward with both fists. Its hands suddenly extended to the limit and pierced into the body of the car from several meters away, blasting out two large holes in the twisted body of the car. If anyone had been hiding in the car, they would definitely have taken the full brunt of the punch. This was also the long-armed monster's proudest attack. Its extendable limbs and infinite strength allowed it to deal with awakened ones without the use of force of nature. Few of the martialists it had killed could react before it attacked. The look of disbelief on their faces when they died had always been a source of pleasure for it. But the moment it hit, the long-armed monster's expression suddenly changed. A woman's figure appeared under the car that had been sent flying. Her posture did not look like she had been hit by a heavy punch at all. Instead, she was calmly squatting down with her body leaning forward. It was clear that she had long been prepared to attack. It thought that its reaction was fast enough. But the other party was obviously faster. And much faster. The dancing silver light once again blossomed from her hands and formed a whirlpool. The sharp light not only shattered the car into pieces, but also the monster's hands. The long-armed monster let out a blood-curdling scream and struggled to retreat. It struggled to break free from the whirlpool. But only a small part of its arm was left. The smelly pus and minced flesh splattered on the ground, leaving a mottled trail. In an instant, one of the two mutated fallen evils that gave official martialists headaches was dead and the other was injured. Your so-called fairness is 3 people ganging up on a little girl? Fei Yuhan raised her hand and waved. The dazzling light dissipated, revealing a plain longsword. I think this can barely be considered fair. Master? Zero hurriedly went forward and grabbed her hand. I've already called your Uncle Roland. Don't worry. Fei Yuhan winked at her and whispered. Zero was startled. But shouldn't we inform the association about this? Uncle isn't as good at fighting as Sister Garcia, and he's usually unreliable. Wouldn't it be too? I'm afraid he's the only one who can do this. Fei Yuhan stroked her head. And your most important mission is to stay as far away from here as possible. Can you do that? The little girl wanted to say something, but under his gaze, she bit her lip and ran towards the border of the pattern. Damn it, how could you be unscathed from that kind of collision? The long-armed monster roared angrily. The reason is simple, I just need to do the same as you guys. Fei Yuhan shrugged, and the power of nature enveloped her body as she spoke. The long-armed monster's pupils constricted, using external strength to render ordinary martial arts ineffective. Isn't this something that only Guardian-level martialists can do? It looked at her in shock. Could it be that you're the genius that the association calls? I don't think it's strange. After all, even the lowest fallen evils can do it, right? Fei Yuhan said nonchalantly. As for you guys, I wanted to see how many attackers there were before deciding on a countermeasure, but I didn't expect to hear such interesting news. I have to thank you, because you've helped me verify a question that has existed in my heart for a long time. Oracle, this guy. The long-armed monster's expression turned extremely ugly, and its sinister aura disappeared without a trace. It even took 2 steps back under the gaze of the genius martialist. Delta raised its right arm and grabbed at the fallen evil. The latter's words were immediately stuck in its throat, and its body froze on the spot, as though it was being squeezed by a giant hand. Accompanied by the sound of bones cracking, the red cyclone in front of its chest detached from its back and flew towards the oracle with traces of flesh and blood. The long-armed monster that lost its core fell to the ground in shock, no longer breathing. The gargoyle fallen evil that was killed by Fei Yuhan suffered the same fate. The cyclone on the ground rose into the air and gathered in its hand. Following that, the solidified cyclone began to spin again, turning into a red mist that flowed into Delta's body. Those who fear the enemy are not worthy of the power bestowed by God. Your mission has come to an end. Delta's voice was flat, as though it was just disposing of the trash in its hands. It looked at Fei Yuhan. How laughable! The person who created the world should be the one who truly needs to go all out, but they are deceived by appearances and fear a mere martialist. Is this because they were once one of you, or is it because of the inherent short-sightedness of fictional creations? Just like you, at this moment, Fei Yuhan made her move. She had been waiting for Zero to get into position, and not for the other party's blabbering. Furthermore, based on past experience, the more one thought themselves to be superior, the more furious they would be when interrupted. Extreme emotions were also a factor that affected one's performance. Fei Yuhan had to make use of every possible opportunity to fight the enemy. The only thing that Fei Yuhan could determine was that the masked man's strength was not on the same level as the mutated fallen evil, and its attack method was rather strange. To prevent it from hurting Zero, the best way was to seal off all of its movements with an airtight attack. She picked up a broken steel rod and threw it at Delta with all her might. The latter had no choice but to shut its mouth and send the steel rod flying with a palm strike. In the next second, Fei Yuhan was already in front of it. Ever since she grasped the technique of materializing the force of nature, she rarely carried weapons. However, that did not mean that weapons were meaningless. Attaching power to objects not only saved her the effort of thinking, but also extended her attack range. As weapons were not allowed in the arena, very few people knew that her mastery of swordsmanship far surpassed that of her fists and legs. The sharp blade wrapped in the force of nature slashed down. Even if the opponent was made of steel, the unreasonable power would still split him into two. However, before the blade could touch the opponent, it was blocked by an invisible ripple. Although it was invisible, it was indestructible. Without a doubt, it was a power that came from the same source as the force of nature. Fei Yuhan maintained her slashing posture as she raised her left leg and kicked at the oracle's waist. This time, it was obvious that her kick had hit its target. The oracle's waist was bent, and he was sent flying. He crashed into the truck with a loud bang, and even the cover of the truck caved in. Could the opponent's ability not be used consecutively? Or must it be used with both hands? Fei Yuhan's mind raced, but she did not hesitate in her movements as she charged towards the truck. In a few seconds, Fei Yuhan had already exchanged more than 10 blows with the opponent. The oracle had been slashed several times, and there were a few wounds on its body. Injuries that would have been fatal to an ordinary person could not even affect its movements. It looked like she had been suppressing the opponent, but only she knew that the opponent would not be defeated just like that. Did she need to hit a vital point? The most suspicious part of the oracle's body was probably its mask. At least in the previous exchange, it had paid more attention to protecting its head. Fei Yuhan purposely slowed down her storm-like attacks and took a step back. This was the posture to escape from the entanglement. Delta, who had obtained a breather, did not hesitate to reach forward. Fei Yuhan fiercely stomped on the ground, advancing instead of retreating. She transformed herself into a sharp sword, and with lightning speed, she stabbed in front of the opponent. Turning retreat into advance seemed simple, but to do so at high speed, one had to overcome a huge inertia. It was impossible to achieve this with just one's joints and torso. Only by having extremely precise control of the force of nature could one complete this process smoothly. Even if she was a moment late, she would be caught by the invisible force. She could even feel the strong wind that swept past her back like a blade. Taking advantage of the oracle's missed grab, Fei Yuhan thrust her sword with all her might, piercing straight into the opponent's mask. Crack! The mask with strange patterns on it cracked. However, she felt something strange. Logically speaking, this attack should have pierced through not only the mask, but also the head. There was no obstruction when the sword pierced through the mask, but she did not see the tip of the sword emerge from the back of the head, as though it had disappeared into the opponent's head. The moment the mask fell, Fei Yuhan could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. Its head was pitch black, like a bottomless black hole. Within the black hole, countless galaxies revolved slowly around the center, forming a gigantic astrolabe. The sword in her hand sank into the astrolabe, unable to cause any ripples. That's right, during the joint extermination operation, the monster that appeared in the abandoned factory seemed to have the same thing. This inconceivable scene caused Fei Yuhan's retreat to slow down for a moment. It was this momentary hesitation that caused her to be unable to dodge the oracle's second attack. The invisible force slammed into the side of her body and sent her flying. The force of nature could be immune to mortal martial arts, but it could not offset the impact of a power of the same origin. She felt her internal organs shift, and an intense pain was stuck in her throat, but she could not make a sound. After rolling on the ground a few times, Fei Yuhan finally stabilized her body. She stood up with her sword, coughing out a mouthful of blood. Chapter 1360. The fairness I'm talking about isn't the number of people, but the rules. Delta bent down to pick up the cracked mask and put it back on his face. The crack that was pierced by the sword merged into one and disappeared without a trace. Not only the mask, but its torn clothes and body also returned to their original state after a while. Under the same rules, the creator is unable to receive the additional protection of the domain, and the oracle can only fight with strength that is not higher than the world's upper limit. This is the essence of fairness. As for the number of people or the situation, it is completely the result of my meticulous planning. How is it unfair? Fei Yuhan wiped the corner of her mouth. I don't think it's a part of the rules to be able to act as if nothing happened after having your head pierced by a sword. Regrettably, this is indeed a rule that has been engraved into the bottom layer. Delta spread open his arms and walked towards her. If you want to blame someone, blame Lon. As a traitorous oracle, she left behind a small backdoor when creating this world. Only the creator and the oracle themselves can truly destroy an oracle. You can injure me, but these injuries will eventually be healed by my magic power. The outcome of this battle has been decided since the beginning. That's why you're so wary of Zero. To be precise, I'm wary of her before the crack was formed. Without the world's protection, she's just an ordinary awakened. Delta paused for a moment. To be able to ask this question, it means that you're different from those logical beings of consciousness. Where did you hear this news? Since you know that you originate from nothingness, why are you still struggling? What's nothingness, and what's reality? Do you think it's really important? Fei Yuhan grinned. Well, the angle is different, the answer isn't fixed. How do you know that you're not another nothingness? She raised her sword and filled her body with the force of nature once again. But to me, there's no world more real than this. Simply ridiculous. Delta snorted and raised his hand to smash her. She did not retreat or give way, but met the opponent's momentum and slashed down. The two forces collided, producing a deafening roar. The airflow caused by the collision even sent the overturned vehicles flying. In such a battle, just entering the area where the two of them were fighting could cause fatal injuries. Needless to say, the divine emissary's body was soon lacerated, and when it fought to the death, half of its body was cut open by the bright silver light that erupted from the genius martial artist's palm. But just as it said, even such a shocking injury could not make it stop moving. As God grabbed his body with one hand, the wound that extended from his shoulder to his chest slowly closed up. Fei Yuhan was unable to do so. Even though her aura was stronger than before, the number of wounds on her body continued to increase, from small abrasions to bone-deep wounds. Her condition seemed to be worsening. Zero couldn't help but cover her mouth. She suddenly understood why Fei Yuhan was unwilling to retreat even half a step despite knowing that she would be injured, and insisted on fighting head-on. It was all because of him. To reduce the possibility of injury, she had to avoid the opponent's strength and strike after finding his weakness. The divine emissary's attacks were all reflected in her hands, and with her skills, it was not impossible for her to predict it in advance. If there were only two people in the crack, her attacks would definitely be more agile. But now, Fei Yuhan could not do so. If she gave up on fighting head-on and chose to retreat, the enemy could completely abandon her and directly charge at her. At this thought, Zero's heart involuntarily clenched. In order to prevent the divine emissary from injuring herself, Fei Yuhan gave up on fighting head-on, and used the most ferocious attack to firmly suppress the enemy in the center of the battlefield. In other words, the injuries she was suffering were all born in place of her. The little girl suddenly felt a lump in her throat. After her awakening, She had the most basic understanding of the power in her body. The reason why Fei Yuhan was still standing was because she was using the force of nature to its extreme. But this power could not prevent her from feeling pain, and there was a limit to it. She could not continue fighting like this. In the end, she would either collapse from the intense pain, or she would exhaust all her energy. Either way, it would cause irreversible damage to her body. Stop fighting. She wanted to shout, but could only let out a soft choking sound. With another full-force sweep, the sword Fei Yuhan used to block was smashed into pieces with a crisp sound. Before she could find a new weapon, her opponent grabbed her right leg and threw her high into the air. Without any leverage in the air, it was difficult to control the trajectory of her fall, no matter how skilled she was. Below, the divine emissary had been waiting for a long time. With a punch that sounded like thunder, the divine emissary flew tens of meters away like a cannonball and crashed into the ground. She rolled more than 10 times before coming to a stop. This time, the white light on Fei Yuhan's body was much dimmer. She tried to prop herself up, but failed several times. Blood flowed down her cheeks, drenching her clothes along with her sweat. No! Zero could no longer hold back. She rushed out of her hiding place and ran all the way to Fei Yuhan. "Master, stay away from me," the divine emissary shouted, causing the little girl, who was about to help her up, to tremble. "Go back to where you were, cough cough. Don't go near here." For the first time, Fei Yuhan revealed an anxious expression. But, before Zero could reply, her body was grabbed by an invisible hand and lifted into the air. "Caught you!" The divine emissary grasped the air with one hand and was about to swing the other. At this moment, Fei Yuhan gritted her teeth, channeled the force of nature into her legs, and charged towards the divine emissary recklessly. With a loud bang, the two of them were stuck together and rolled far away. Zero also fell from the air. To be able to last 30 minutes in such a battle, your strength is indeed commendable, but what's the point of continuing to persevere? Delta grabbed the immobile pugilist and brought her in front of him. You should also know that the appearance of this world is but a mistake. It is like a flower in a mirror, the moon in the water. Its activation and stillness are tied to the Creator's thoughts. I don't think that he will treat you as the same. Everything you've done is merely a joke. Fei Yuhan, who had suffered consecutive heavy blows, was badly mutilated. Her 2 legs were completely broken due to her reckless eruption, and her shoulder and right arm looked like they had been run over by a giant object. Her skin and bones were split open, and it was a horrible sight to behold. But even so, she still forced a smile and looked at the divine emissary with a condescending gaze. "I've said it before, so what? I can't choose the world I was born in, but at least I can choose to act according to my own will. And you, other than God, what else do you have? I'm afraid you haven't even seen God's true appearance." She gasped for breath. "Furthermore, I don't think the Creator will think the same as you." "What do you mean?" Delta frowned. For some reason, it suddenly felt somewhat vexed. "They are people from outside this world. Cough cough, they clearly don't belong to this world, but they are still working hard for this world. If they only treat this place as an illusion, how could they reach this stage? The outsiders are already working so hard, so what reason do I have not to work even harder? If you don't believe me, wait for him to come. You can ask him personally. I believe his answer will not be the same as what you think. Could it be that you've persevered until now, just to wait for the other Creator's support?" Delta shook its head. "Give up, I've planned for so long. Naturally I won't give you this chance. Outside the crack, there's still an oracle. It alone might not be able to defeat the main Creator, but it won't be a problem to delay him for a period of time. And you've obviously reached your limit." It loosened its grip, allowing Fei Yuhan to fall to the ground. "I won't kill you. Use magic power to protect your vitals now, and you might be able to preserve your life. When this world returns to its origin, you will finally witness the greatness of God." After finishing its words, Delta strode towards its true objective. But before it could take a single step, it suddenly stopped. Turning its head, it saw Fei Yuhan stretch out her remaining left hand and grab onto its leg. You, impossibly stupid. It could not help but fly into a rage. It raised its hand and slammed it down behind it. The invisible palm immediately pressed the pugilist's body into the ground, and a circle of spider web-like cracks appeared around it. The hand that was grabbing onto it finally dropped down slowly. I've given you a chance. Master. Zero screamed at the top of her lungs. Don't worry, you'll be the next one soon. Delta suppressed the emotions that should not have existed in its heart, and once again raised its hands towards the Creator. At this moment, a deep rumble suddenly resounded through the crack. Light flashed past the patterns, like ripples sweeping across the surface of water, followed by a second and a third. It was as though something was striking the crack from the outside, causing the space to tremble rhythmically. How could it be so fast? Delta was stunned. This was impossible. Although the erosion trap set up using the magic power core was unable to isolate the inside from the outside like the crack, it should at least be able to trap the other party for a few hours. Epsilon, what's happening outside? It shouted through the air. Answer me, Epsilon. But there was no reply from the other end of the crack. Damn it. Delta raised its hand to grab Zero, and at this moment, an extremely dazzling flash of light passed through the crack, leaving a scorching mark on the patterns. Following that, the light dispersed in all directions, dispersing the darkness of the world. The faded scenery returned to the two sides of the bridge. The crack split open. Chapter 1361. The frozen light instantly regained its flow. Under the new influx of sunlight, the Oracle's invisible hand that grabbed Zero was no longer indestructible. Instead, it twisted and softened like a bubble. A dazzling blue light descended from the sky, replacing the weak silver light that the little girl used to resist. Without the interference of God, even if the other party was a newly awakened consciousness, it was no longer easy to win. At the same time, two new figures rushed into the sealed domain. It did not find Epsilon, but saw another target that needed to be eliminated. It was also the main creator of this world, Roland. Delta raised his other hand and fiercely smashed it down towards his opponent. But this attack did not even raise a speck of dust. Before it even touched him, the power disappeared, as though it had never existed. To a martial artist who was sprinting at full speed, a distance of a few hundred meters was but a split second. Before Delta could react, Roland crushed its mask and grabbed the astrolabe. No matter how hard it struggled, it could not escape from Roland's grasp. If its ability was greatly weakened in front of Zero, it was almost completely ineffective in front of Roland. This isn't fair. Its consciousness began to dissipate as the astrolabe was stripped away. But Roland was unmoved. He knew that regardless of whether it was a pure magic creature or an enemy from the erosion, their weakness was the rotating astrolabe in their bodies. As long as it was forcefully pulled out, they would melt like snow under the scorching sun. The power in his body was cheering, as though it was welcoming the arrival of that moment. Until now, Roland still had not figured out the ins and outs of the matter. Less than half a minute after separating from Vaucres, he received a call from Fei Yuhan. But there were no words from the other side. The only thing he could hear was the ear-piercing sound of collision and friction. When the call was cut off, he saw through the sightseeing elevator that something had happened in the outskirts of the city. A strange translucent barrier had enveloped the highway bridge that connected the city to the outskirts. This was definitely not something that could be done with technology. Furthermore, a phenomenon that could cause a celebrity martial artist to be unable to explain the situation was definitely not a trivial matter. After he drove out of the underground garage, he coincidentally met Vaucres, who was running in the same direction, so he picked her up. However, he did not expect to find Zero inside after breaking the cover. As for the strange man in the long robe and mask, he was obviously one of the oracles. Therefore, even if he had not figured out the ins and outs of the situation, he would not hesitate to kill the oracle first. The association had been searching for the whereabouts of these invading enemies, but they had never found any reliable clues. Now that they had appeared in front of him and even tried to kill Zero, he would not let go of this opportunity. The moment the astrolabe was completely stripped off, A resplendent pillar of light soared into the sky and enveloped him. Sure enough, this familiar scene appeared again. Uncle Roland! From the corner of his eye, he saw Zero's tear-stained face. He made a reassuring gesture, and the radiance that filled the sky swallowed everything. Compared to the last time when he was caught off guard, Roland was more or less prepared this time. He no longer deliberately resisted the influx of consciousness, but opened his mind, allowing himself to accept and feel them. After all, it was useless no matter how much he resisted. It was better to relax and focus on the surging consciousness. Hiss, hiss, his vision quickly became blurred, and countless snowflakes flew up and down, forming a black and white scene. Along with the snowflakes, Lan's whisper also appeared. Compared to what I told you, what you personally understood is the real answer. After an unknown amount of time, the light gradually dimmed, and he finally saw the scene in front of him clearly. This is it. Roland could not help but swallow his saliva. He saw a huge red hole hanging in a boundless, pitch-black void. It had no thickness, but it was shockingly wide. From his position, the size of the hole could only be measured in astronomical units. Further away, there were countless flashing spots of light. They blended together with the snowflakes, and he could not tell whether they were real or just an illusion caused by a blurry image. In Roland's memory, there was only one thing that could match this scene. The darkness did not mean that there was no light, and the void did not mean that there was nothing. It was just that it was too big. Those flickering spots of light were something that ordinary people would find hard to count in their entire lives, but they were an insignificant part of it. Universe. This span is really unexpected. Roland could not help but criticize. He originally thought that seeing the legendary bottomless land for the first time was already shocking enough, but he never expected that not only did his vision not shrink, but it had expanded to a whole new level. The problem was, if the scene he was seeing was the universe he understood, what was the connection between the two scenes? Could it be that the civilizations that rode the bottomless land's pillar of light to head to the sky were actually sent into space? If that was the case, the word upgrade was rather suitable. But be it the radiation race or the matchstick men, they did not seem like species that could survive in a completely different environment. Since flames and sharp weapons could injure them, it meant that their resistance to temperature and pressure was not much stronger than humans. But when the upgrade happened, the radiation race that stepped into the pillar of light did not seem to have made the necessary preparations. That's not right. He quickly rejected this guess. Such an explanation was too far-fetched. It was purely a conjecture that forcefully linked the two scenes together. Ignoring everything else, it was hard to explain why the god that guided all of this would do such a meaningless thing. Be it the endless battle of divine will or the legacy shard that brought about evolution, it did not seem like it was prepared for such a scene. There had to be a deeper meaning behind it. Suddenly, Roland noticed that something was squirming beneath the red hole. As though influenced by his thoughts, his vision began to zoom in on the location of the movement. Only then did he notice that there were many scattered meteorites floating beneath the hole. They looked like the scattered fragments of a planet, but it also seemed as though they had always been so. At first glance, it looked like a desolate ruin. With his knowledge, it was difficult to determine where these things came from. And these fragments seemed to be drawn by some force as they gradually gathered towards a special stone in the middle. As more and more fragments piled up, the volume of the stone became larger and larger. Every time a new fragment was absorbed, the surface would change drastically. At this moment, Roland suddenly realized that although these floating stones looked small and scattered, each one of them could not be underestimated. That was why this gathering was so earth-shattering. Similarly, without any reference, the whole process seemed to be very fast, but the actual time span was probably even more astonishing than he had imagined. As if to prove this idea, the snowflakes began to become denser. This scene seemed to be coming to an end. Amidst the noise that filled his field of vision, the stone had gradually formed into an irregular sphere. Then he saw an incredible scene. A layer of diamond-shaped veins suddenly appeared and spread along the surface of the sphere. Everywhere it went was hidden in darkness, as if it was swallowing the sphere. If it were not for the faint reflection, He would have thought that the stone just disappeared in front of him. When it was completely wrapped up, the sphere was completely hidden under the huge red hole. Then, snowflakes occupied his entire field of vision. Just before everything ended, a line of words that he had never seen before flowed into Roland's mind. Although he had never seen it before, he could understand its meaning. Or rather, it was not words, but a sigh that was directly reflected in his mind. This is the price. From this moment on, gravity is no longer the most admirable force in this world. Chapter 1362. Hey, Roland. Roland, why are you in a daze? Uncle, come and save her. Two voices rang out alternately, pulling Roland back to reality. He blinked, and the light pillar and snowflakes disappeared without a trace. The messy bridge once again came into view. Zero and Valkyries were cleaning up the ruins, and from their expressions, it seemed like the incident was not over yet. That's right. He suddenly remembered that the person who made him feel strange on the phone was the association's genius martial artist, Fei Yuhan. But where was she now? Could it be that Zero's save was referring to? Roland's expression immediately froze. His thoughts finally returned to the right track. He temporarily threw the scene he saw to the back of his mind and rushed to the two's side. He could not help but gasp. He saw a badly mutilated woman lying in a shallow pit that had been smashed by a heavy object. Her limbs, except for her left arm, were almost completely crushed. Broken bones and blood clots were mixed together, and she was already out of shape. Her body was covered in cuts and bruises, and her clothes were almost completely soaked in blood. Her spine was twisted into an abrupt curve, and even half of her skin was exposed. Even on the battlefield, this was a scene that no one could bear to see. And from the side of her face, this person was Fei Yuhan. She still had a trace of breath left, but it was only a trace. How could this be? Roland squatted down, not knowing what to do for a moment. First aid? Even if there was a bandage, it would not be able to wrap the bleeding organs back to their original positions. There was no need to mention stopping the bleeding. There was not a single part of her body that was intact, and her internal functions had collapsed. She was completely relying on the force of nature to maintain her spirit. But this bit of strength was like a candle burning to the end, and there was not much left. In fact, to maintain consciousness in such a situation required an extremely strong will, and even among martial artists, only a few could do this. Master became like this because she was protecting me. Zero was sobbing uncontrollably. She's about to die. Valkyries had noticed this as well. Even if a great Dark Lord is gravely injured, the red mist pond will only slow him down for a moment. Besides, the medical skills in this world were far inferior to those in the red mist pond. Even if she had abundant magic power, she could not reverse the process. As a soldier, she persisted until the end. You finally could come. As if hearing their voices, Fei Yuhan opened her eyes slightly. Should I call you Lord God? Her tone was somewhat humorous, and her expression was completely unlike that of a person in a desperate situation. Roland couldn't help but be stunned. Sorry, I eavesdropped on your conversation. She winked at Valkyries, which was the only thing she could do. But if I could do it again, I would still do it. Zero, is she all right? These few words seemed to have exhausted most of her strength. Only by holding her breath could she hear her whispers. Master, fine. Zero whimpered. Then this world is still in good condition, right? Fei Yuhan exhaled lightly. This way, I can be considered to have done my part in protecting it. So you know that this world is just a dream, Valkyries frowned. Perhaps to you, there are many worlds, but to me, this is the only one. And protecting this world is the duty of a martial artist. She paused for a moment. I say, Lord God, since you created it, shouldn't you trust everyone a little more? Trust everyone? I know it sounds unbelievable, but as long as you produce proof, the higher-ups of the association won't be so stubborn. We can't do much, but it's not completely useless. Even if we can't defeat the Oracle, we can at least help you share some of the pressure. This way, Saving the world will be easier, right? Gather everyone's strength. An idea suddenly flashed through Roland's mind. That's right, he was the creator of this world. But he was not an omnipotent god. There were some things he could not do. But others can. By combining everyone's strength, they might be able to achieve some seemingly impossible miracles. The last thing I want to say is, thank you. Fei Yuhan's voice was already as thin as gossamer. Thank you for creating it, even if it's just a dream. No, the world is not a dream, Roland interrupted. It exists in the realm of mind and will continue to exist. I knew you would say that. Fei Yuhan closed her eyes and revealed a satisfied smile. Also, I think that even if there is evidence, it's too unconvincing for one person to claim to be the god of creation. But if you add in a genius martial artist, perhaps the effect will be very different. She moved her lips. Are you comforting me? This is not comfort, but the assertion of the creator. Roland stood up and said, listen, now is not the time to give up. Since you mentioned trust, then please believe me, this situation is far from irreversible. Because I am a god. The dream was interrupted, and Roland suddenly sat up from the recliner. It was still afternoon, and snowflakes were floating outside the window. Nightingale, who was guarding the office, immediately appeared in front of him and asked worriedly, "Why are you awake so soon? Are you feeling unwell?" This was the first time he had entered the dream world after being unconscious for 2 days. According to his usual habits, he would usually sleep from 1 to 4 in the afternoon, but now was clearly not the time. "Don't worry, I'm fine," Roland said solemnly. "Inform Scroll and Honey to come to the castle immediately. I have an important task to arrange." Nightingale carefully checked his body temperature and pulse, and after confirming that there were no problems, she nodded and said, "I understand." After waiting for her to enter the mist, Roland returned to his desk and laid out a pen and paper to plan. To save Fei Yuhan's life, the two worlds had to work together to rescue her. Once he left the dream world, time would stop, and this would undoubtedly give him an extremely crucial opportunity to rescue her. Even if he only had 1 breath left, if he did not enter the dream world again, this breath would not end. The core of resurrection lay in Nana's new ability, enchanted objects with healing powers. As long as he used a sufficient amount at once, he could prevent the collapse of her body's functions. Next was Scroll's domain. He was unable to bring things into the dream world, but the small archive could. Considering that the witch's abilities could be accepted and displayed in the dream world, the enchanted objects should be able to smoothly reach the realm of mind. Of course, just these two were not enough. First, he needed to send these life-saving healing items from the archive to the highway bridge in the shortest time possible. Secondly, the enchanted sutures and gauze could only pull Fei Yuhan back from the brink of death. To treat injuries such as bone fractures, he needed more professional equipment and tools, which undoubtedly required the assistance of a professional doctor. Only by gathering everyone's strength could he create this miracle. Chapter 1363. 5 days later, Seagull landed in Neverwinter's Air Knight Academy. Tilly got off the plane with Nana. For the first time, she did not question Roland about the special plane. Instead, she asked eagerly, "We're not too late, are we?" Due to the fact that the Iron Tower project had yet to compile a complete set of communication codes, the reserve Air Knight who had completed the theoretical course had all gone to Thorntown for the next step of actual aircraft training. Therefore, the fastest way to contact the front line was through a flying messenger. Even though traveling across 2.5 kingdoms in 4 days and returning in 1 day wasn't considered slow, it was still a rather long period of time for emergency treatment. "No, you guys came at the right time," Roland replied. "Really? That's good. I'll send an empty night to Neverwinter next time, just in case." Tilly let out a sigh of relief. "By the way, who was injured?" "There." Roland was at a loss for words. The information carried by the messenger was limited, so he did not give too many details. He only asked Tilly to send Nana back to Neverwinter as soon as possible. Now that he was asked, he did not know how to explain. After a moment of silence, he said, A person who doesn't exist in this world. The corner of Tilly's mouth twitched. You mean the dream? As expected of the fifth princess, her reaction was unusually sharp. Roland coughed twice and said, something like that. Then why don't you just say it directly? Why do you have to beat around the bush? Tilly glanced at him in disgust. What? Are you afraid that we'll find out that you came back from thousands of miles away just for an illusory dream? You hit the nail on the head, Nana echoed. You don't have to say it out loud. Vendi shook her head with a smile. Are the three of you guys singing a duet? It's good to know that guilt is a good thing, brother. Tilly stood on tiptoe and reached out to poke his chest. But you're looking down on us too much. Since you think it's necessary to do this, no matter how absurd and unruly it is, we'll do it first. So, what should we do next? This was probably another way of expressing trust, right? Roland pressed Tilly's head down and exhaled a mouthful of white air. Let's go back to the castle. Scroll is already waiting for us there. With sufficient preparation in advance, Nana quickly produced a large number of magic sutures. According to her, even if one did not know how to suture, as long as they were placed near the wound, they would be able to heal. The only problem was that they had to be removed after the surgery. Otherwise, these unfixed sutures would likely cause new problems for the injured. Considering that items in the real world would not disappear into thin air, Scroll only needed to repeatedly enter and exit the realm of mind a few times to obtain a large amount of sutures. Thus, Nana was able to reserve enough magic power to enchant the subsequent medical equipment. Although the preparatory work took 5 days, it was only a moment in the dream world. Of course, this way the relevant people in the dream world, such as Zero and Valkyries, would likely notice that something was amiss. But Roland did not have the time to care about that. After everything was ready, he took a deep breath and gestured to Scroll and the other witches to be at ease. He then closed his eyes and entered the dream world. After a moment of absent-mindedness, the familiar scene reappeared before his eyes. Fei Yuhan was still lying motionless in a pool of blood, while the other two stared at him in astonishment. Zero impatiently grabbed his sleeve. Uncle, don't tell me you have a way to save her? Time seemed to reconnect at this moment, and he seemed to have returned to 5 days ago. Roland did not explain further. He quickly took out his phone and dialed Garcia's number. The martial arts tournament had ended. If there were no accidents, Garcia should be living in the apartment. The call was quickly connected. Hello, what's the matter? Where you now? Outside. Roland's heart immediately sank. Why not stay at home? If this plan failed, he could only choose the backup plan and inform the association's garrison guard to mobilize more people. Not only would that take more time to explain, but it might not achieve the desired effect. Hey, what's with your attitude? Can't I go downstairs to buy some snacks? He suddenly heaved a sigh of relief. So you're in the neighborhood? Do you have the car keys with you? Nonsense. Garcia's annoyed voice came from the other side of the phone. So what exactly do you want to say? Roland coughed twice and said in the most solemn tone, Listen up, I have a lifelong request, and this is something only you can do. Her imposing manner suddenly weakened. That? Must it be said over the phone? That's right, or else it will be too late. Immediately drive to the 6-mile pavilion 2 blocks away and pick up a lady named Scroll. She will be waiting for you at the intersection, and you will definitely not miss her. After that, send her to the Western Suburbs Expressway Bridge, which is where I am now. Roland paused. It will take about 30 minutes to drive between the two places, but I don't have that much time. So you have to get there as soon as possible, and I will bear all the trouble. Please, set off now. The other end of the phone was silent for a few seconds, followed by the rhythmic sound of running. In other words, you don't have time to explain further? All right, if I wait until I get there and find out that this matter isn't that important, you should know how serious the consequences will be. She hung up the phone the moment the sound of an engine was heard. Also, you owe me this. Roland then dialed Defender Rock's number. This time, he roughly summarized the situation. Miss Fei Yuhan is currently seriously injured, and the association needs to send the best doctors and equipment to treat her. However, this alone isn't enough. Garcia is currently rushing to the scene of the incident with a life-saving item. If possible, I hope that the association can coordinate with the traffic department to control the roads along the way so that she can reach the bridge as soon as possible. Rock immediately agreed and told them that they would immediately contact the relevant departments to deal with this matter. However, Roland was also clear that without prior communication, the possibility of the government responding in time was extremely slim. Whether or not she could reach the bridge successfully depended on Garcia herself. About 5 minutes had passed by the time he put down the phone. The only thing he could do now was to wait. Fortunately, there was not much traffic in the winter, especially when it was closer to the suburbs. As long as it was not rush hour, Garcia should be able to drive at a speed that a van would not be able to match. You can't hold on any longer. Suddenly, Zero's sobbing voice broke Roland's train of thought. Roland hurriedly returned to Fei Yuhan's side, only to see that her slightly trembling chest had now completely calmed down. Her heart and breathing have stopped. Valkyries frowned. Although I don't know what method you've come up with, I'm afraid it's already too late. No, she will persevere. Roland stretched out his hand and gently pressed on Fei Yuhan's blood-stained forehead. At this point, I believe that she won't give up so easily. He had heard that after a person's bodily function stopped, the brain would still function for a period of time, ranging from 10 seconds to a few minutes. The brain waves would show the waveform of sleep, as if the person was truly asleep. The length of this period might depend on many factors, but in terms of individual willpower, a martial artist genius was definitely one of the best. After 10 minutes and 25 seconds, a loud roar came from the bridge. Roland's eyes could not help but light up. Immediately after, a red ray of light smashed through the tattered metal sheet of the carriage and came to a halt in front of the three. Your Majesty! Scroll opened the car door and threw the paper bag in her hand to Roland. The latter could not care less about Zero and Garcia's astonished expressions. He tore open the bag and evenly spread the healing sutures on Fei Yuhan's body. This is a magic created by a witch? Valkyries raised her brows. That's right. Roland nodded. As long as it works, even if she's on her last breath, she can still be saved. At this moment, Nana's power transcended the barrier between dream and reality, acting on the body of the woman in the other world. Her body let out a rustling sound as her flesh and organs began to merge together under the stimulation of the magic. More than 10 minutes later, everyone heard an almost imperceptible thump. Although it was extremely weak, it was more pleasing to the ear than any other sound. Fei Yuhan's chest resumed its beating. Baidu search 881 Chinese net yen. No advertising words. Please remember this book's domain name. For mobile version Chapter 1364. She had a long dream. In the dream, countless people in white coats and masks surrounded her, sweating profusely as they worked on something. From their shocked and solemn expressions, it seemed like they were dealing with an extremely troublesome matter. Right, her previous self was seriously injured and was on the verge of death. Perhaps this was the brain's way of consoling itself? She knew how terrible her condition was. Under normal circumstances, the medical staff would only need to take a glance at her before turning around and asking for instructions for her funeral. They would not waste their energy on useless things. Although she believed that Roland was the creator of the world, she was also aware that God was not omnipotent. Otherwise, the oracle would not have found a chance. She followed the oracle's request and persevered until the end, so she had a clear conscience. Realizing that she was dreaming was a wonderful feeling. Her entire body felt like it was immersed in a warm and gentle light, and all the pain she had suffered disappeared. The voices of people talking seemed to come from far away, and the scene in front of her became increasingly blurry, making her drowsy. Gradually, the scene merged with the other fragments of her memory. The gray sky above her head turned into a vast expanse of white shadowless lights. After the doctors were done, they left one by one. Herself being carried by the medical staff and sent to a man and woman. The two kissed her, their faces revealing joyful smiles. Following that, she struggled and grew up bit by bit. Like a horse lantern, she realized that this might be the final flashback in her mind. The strange thing was that he clearly couldn't remember anything in the past. There were only a few extremely vague memory fragments, but they were completely reproduced in his dream. She saw her childhood home, the backyard that was hung with sheets, and her family. So this was the place she lived in back then. Lying in the embrace of her family, she closed her eyes in satisfaction. When sleep completely enveloped her, a loving murmur came from above her head. "What do you think the child should be named? How about Fei Yuhan?" After a long time, Fei Yuhan slowly opened her eyes. Looking at the familiar ward ceiling, her mind went blank for a while before she reacted. "Wait, am I still alive?" She tried to feel her whole body and found that her hands and feet all responded to her will. Not only that, there was not even the slightest delay between her consciousness and movements, as if they had never been injured. Fei Yuhan raised her right hand in front of her in astonishment. Although her entire arm was wrapped in bandages from the outline, it was as good as new. This hand had clearly been broken into several pieces, and even the bones had been crushed into the flesh. There was no way it could be restored to its original state by conventional means. She couldn't help but burst into laughter. That guy really did it. At that time, he even vowed, "Because I am God." Did he not notice that his age was not suitable for such a line? "Oh, Master." At this moment, he heard a whisper that sounded like he was talking in his sleep. Fei Yuhan tilted her head and discovered a white-haired girl lying on the bed. It was none other than the other world creator mentioned by the oracle, Zero. Her hands were resting on her head, and she seemed to be asleep. However, from her slightly melancholy eyebrows, Fei Yuhan could tell that she had been by the bed the entire time she was unconscious. Fei Yuhan smiled and quietly got off the bed. She carried Zero to bed and then quietly walked out of the ward. At the resting area in the corridor, she saw Roland, Valkyries, and many other martial artists. A wave of commotion arose in the crowd when they saw her appear, and many people surrounded her and asked about her situation at once. But she directly brushed past them and strode in front of Roland. She grabbed his hand and said, "Let's go, it's time to get down to business." Roland instantly felt dozens of scorching gazes on him. Business? It's not very convincing if you claim to be the god of creation alone, but if you add in the genius martial artist, maybe the effect will be very different. Isn't this what you promised? She raised her eyebrows and smiled. "You've fulfilled your promise, and now it's my turn. You're going to go there in this state?" Roland asked in surprise. At this moment, Fei Yuhan was still wearing the striped hospital gown. Only her head was exposed, and she looked like a rice dumpling. She led Roland toward the corridor. "Of course, it's more convincing, isn't it?" In the conference hall of the sanatorium, the higher-ups of the Prism City sat in a circle and listened to Fei Yuhan's report with complicated expressions. At that time, the enemy was very different from the fallen evils. Not only did it have incredible abilities, but it was also very difficult to inflict fatal damage, even if I raised my force of nature to the limit. According to it, only the creator of this world and the oracle can destroy their core. Reality has proven this point. I've hit its astrolabe many times, but it was unharmed. If not for Roland's timely arrival, I'm afraid the situation would have been irreversible. The enemy called itself Delta, and it came from the erosion, an emissary of God. If it's one of the murderers that destroyed the Prism City, then it's entirely possible that its accomplices have similar characteristics. There's no doubt that our world is in great danger. These words caused a wave of whispers to rise in the hall. The fallen evils were not afraid of ordinary martial artists, and only martial artists could kill them. But now, there was suddenly an oracle, and even the force of nature was ineffective against it. Didn't that mean that it was invincible? If it was another martial artist who said this, everyone would probably suspect that it was a problem of ability, but since it was Fei Yuhan, they did not doubt it. An undefeatable enemy made people shudder just thinking about it. Not to mention that there were several oracles. I'm very happy that you're fine, and also glad that Mr. Roland stood on the association's side. Rock was the first to speak after a moment of silence. Indeed, from the information gathered at the scene, the enemy does indeed have powers that we can't understand, and the one who defeated it was definitely a martial artist present. Combining all the descriptions, we have reason to believe that the one who defeated the enemy of erosion was Hunter Roland. Furthermore, he was able to save you from unimaginable injuries, so he definitely has extraordinary means. But isn't it a little too hasty to believe that he's the creator of the world just from a few words from the enemy? I agree. After all, this concept can be big or small. If the world was created by someone, then where were these people before it appeared? That's ridiculous. Our world should have been born from the Big Bang. If this is Miss Fei Yuhan's judgment, I'm willing to believe it. Everyone has seen her injuries, and it's not an exaggeration to say that she was brought back from the dead. She basically recovered in a short period of a day and a night. Other than God, who else can do this? Don't forget that the enemy of erosion also calls itself an oracle. If both of them are gods, then who has the final say? The upper echelons broke into a flurry of discussion. Even though they had deliberately lowered their voices, everyone present was a powerful martial artist, and they could still clearly hear each other's conversation. Most of the voices were filled with doubt. First of all, everyone is mistaken about one thing. Fei Yuhan interrupted the discussion. I didn't think that Roland is the creator of the world because of this battle, but I've long suspected it. It's just that I was able to confirm it during the battle. As for the details, it's a little complicated, so I won't go into it here. I know it sounds unbelievable, but everyone seems to have forgotten that the creator is right beside me. If he can produce conclusive evidence, then this matter will naturally come to a conclusion, right? Roland could not help but touch his forehead. He knew that this was not something that could be easily won over, so he had no intention of revealing it to the association. But since he had already come this far, he had to cooperate with Fei Yuhan, who had done her best to help him announce his identity. Does the association still have the fallen force of nature cores? Roland looked at Guardian Rock. Most of the cores were taken by the enemy during the fall of the Prism City, and the remaining ones are the fruits of recent hunts. Rock nodded. They are currently under my personal watch. Then bring the cores over, he said slowly. It's time to let the imprisoned magic power return to this world. Genius 1 Second Remember website. Apex mobile version. Chapter 1365. Mr. Rock. Someone called out, seemingly trying to stop him. It's okay. The Rock Ghost King waved his hand. If I remember correctly, more than 30% of these cores were seized by this hunter. If he wanted to get the cores, he wouldn't have waited until now. To be honest, I can't tell if Roland is the creator or not, but he's definitely the most competent one when it comes to fighting against the fallen evils. Then he nodded to the secretary and said, "Go get the core box." This was not a secret among the higher-ups. Many people had heard of the outstanding performance of the new hunter. The old faction even felt proud of this and had a lot more confidence for a period of time. After all, in the past, exterminating the fallen evils and retrieving their cores required the cooperation of many parties. This was because the fallen evils usually only targeted weak martialists and usually hid in the dark, leaving very few opportunities for the association. However, after the appearance of the new hunter, the fallen evils were like moths flying into a flame, falling into his hands one after another. This hunting efficiency could be considered one of the highest in the history of the association. After a brief silence in the hall, another middle-aged man rubbed his hands and said, "Let's put aside God and what not for now. I would like to ask Mr. Roland another question." Roland shrugged indifferently. "I've asked an emergency doctor about Miss Fei Yuhan's injuries. It's not something that can be healed by the force of nature and modern medicine. They said that you used some mediocre and substandard medical equipment, but it produced an unbelievable effect, as if you could regenerate flesh and blood." The man took a deep breath. "Perhaps you have some considerations and can't reveal the origin and manufacturing method of these equipment. I don't want to ask too much, but Can you sell some of these medical equipment to the association? I guarantee that the price is negotiable. That's what I wanted to ask as well. Fei Yuhan suddenly tilted her head and whispered into his ear, to be able to save me in that state, don't tell me that you actually used priceless immortal herbs or elixirs from another world and that the medical equipment was just a pretense. Although I have some savings, I'm still far from being rich enough to rival a country. Roland couldn't help but laugh. He didn't expect that the genius martial artist, who was hard to get close to, would say such a thing. Don't worry, it's free. Phew, that's good. Fei Yuhan heaved a sigh of relief. But don't tell them that. Sometimes, the more free something is, the less they appreciate it. Roland gestured that he understood and looked at the middle-aged man. Of course. Martialists are the front line against the erosion. Naturally, I hope that everyone can put down their worries and fight the enemy to the end. In addition, I did not intend to hide their origins. Those things were not products of this world, but came from another world. They have all been improved by magic, and in a sense, they are no longer ordinary objects. This was definitely a huge piece of news. The conference hall was in an uproar. Another world? What is magic power? Wait, he just mentioned releasing the imprisoned magic power. Is the force of nature also a kind of magic power? You will find out. Faced with everyone's astonished questions, Roland replied calmly, including where I was before the birth of this world, the original intention of God, and the relationship between magic power and the world. I will tell you everything. But before that, let me show you the most direct evidence. As soon as he finished speaking, the Defender's secretary walked into the conference hall with a safe. After Rock verified the fingerprint and retina, the safe opened automatically, revealing a row of neatly arranged glass jars. There were a total of 6 jars, each sealed with a red crystal. And that was the core of the solidified force of nature. Is this enough? Rock asked. It's enough as proof. Roland nodded. At the Defender's signal, the secretary brought the glass jars to him. There is an alarm on the seal of each jar. Whoever opens it will be recorded by the association, Rock explained. If an ordinary person comes into contact with the core, their consciousness will immediately be taken away, and they will become a low-level fallen evil who can only act on instinct. The awakened have a certain resistance, but if they come into contact with the core for a long time, they will also be eroded, and this process cannot be reversed. In order to prevent them from being used by the fallen evils again, the association had to build many large strongholds to hide them. It can be said that all the famous buildings in history have been used as storage points. In modern times, although technology has greatly improved, this method has not changed much. Prism City is one of them. From today onwards, you don't have to do this anymore, Roland said as he opened the seal and poured the core on his palm. Gasps could be heard from the surroundings. The solidified core began to rotate again, as if it had awakened from stillness. Not only that, but its color gradually changed from dark red to sky blue, as if it had been purified. Then the core turned into a ray of light and shot into the ceiling, disappearing without a trace, leaving only scattered fluorescent spots around it, as if the scene just now was just an illusion. Everyone was dumbfounded. Since the establishment of the association, they had never heard of such a thing. Even thousands of years ago, there was no record of the core disappearing into thin air in historical documents about the awakened. Once a fallen evil appeared, the eroded core would never disappear, and it would become a seed of danger and disaster that had been passed down for generations. This was common knowledge. The only way to destroy the fallen core was to throw it into the erosion breach, but that would cause the breach to expand rapidly, so this method would not be used unless it was absolutely necessary. However, the scene in front of them completely subverted their common sense. Mr. Roland, where did the core go? Even the usually calm Rock Ghost King revealed an excited expression. As I said before, they have returned to this world. This is also the biggest difference between the dream world and the real world. The existence and continuity of the dream world are all based on magic power. Roland picked up another core and turned it into a ray of silver light. According to the information I have so far, magic power is almost omnipotent. It can give the awakened strength and physique far beyond that of ordinary people, and it can also regenerate flesh and blood. The force of nature is essentially another manifestation of magic power. The source of this power is temporarily unknown, but one thing is certain: it has something to do with God. Then he roughly described the situation in the other world and the existence of the betrayal of God's messenger. In order to reduce the difficulty of understanding, he deliberately skipped many details and focused on the continuous cycle of the battle of divine will. I don't know whether it is a coincidence that there are records about the battle of divine will in both worlds, but there is no doubt that if we do not break this cycle, God will destroy everything in existence, or in other words, he has already begun to do so. Roland paused. If we just stand by and watch, when the time comes, both reality and the dream world will no longer exist. Chapter 1366. There was a dead silence in the conference hall. Everyone looked at each other with complicated expressions, with the exception of Fei Yuhan. This surprised Roland quite a bit. It seemed that without him noticing, the other party had already gained a considerable understanding of his origins and the other world. After a long while, Rock cautiously said, "Dream world. Do you mean that it can disappear at any time like a dream?" "No, this is just what I'm used to calling it, because I can only enter this world when I'm asleep," Roland said frankly. "At first, I also thought that it was as illusory as a dream, but everything I experienced here changed my mind. You can also call the world I'm in a dream and treat this place as reality. I even believe that when the research of magic on both sides reaches a certain level, the connection between the two worlds will reach a new level." He saw Fei Yuhan's lips curl up from the corner of his eye. Even if he didn't continue, everyone present could understand what he meant. The barrier between the two worlds would disappear without a trace. People would be able to freely travel between the two worlds. That will have to wait until it's realized. An elder frowned. The problem now is that we do not have any means to verify the authenticity of your words. All of this is too outrageous. Forgive me for not being able to believe it. Mr. Roland, I have no intention of blaming you, but your understanding of this matter basically comes from the betrayal of the oracles. Who knows what schemes they are hiding behind? Very quickly, someone else echoed, "The essence of God is the main point, but the other party is afraid of being found out by God. It's really hard to believe. Isn't the most important thing God's power? Why hasn't an existence that can destroy the world taken action? Perhaps our rash actions are the real reason for our destruction." Once someone spoke up, voices of doubt sprang up like bamboo shoots after a spring rain. "I feel that this is a dead end. According to the oracles, if we do nothing, the world will be destroyed, but after invading God's domain, the outcome of defeat is still destruction. So here comes the problem, Mr. Roland. Do you think you have any chance of defeating God? It's hard to say whether these words are true or not. In my opinion, why can't it be an excuse that the hunter made up out of thin air to seek a higher status? Of course, the traditionalists are not completely innocent. What did you say? Don't forget that the people who support him the most are your new generation of celebrities." At first, it was just a discussion, but the atmosphere gradually became tense. Roland did not interrupt. He picked up his teacup and leaned against the back of the long chair, quietly watching everyone argue with each other. He had expected this to happen. Honestly speaking, if he were to be told such a thing, his reaction wouldn't be any better. And the doubts that Roland raised were all on the same point. For example, how trustworthy was the betrayal of an oracle by only giving clues without giving a direct answer, as well as what he could change after facing a god? Not to mention that I couldn't answer these questions now. Even if it really came down to it, I probably wouldn't know the answer. For this reason, he purposely hid the news that the traitor was Lon. This way, when the higher-ups of the association argued with each other, at least they wouldn't target Garcia's master. As for the final result, he did not have much hope. A person like Fei Yuhan, who had a firm will and would go all out once she made a decision, was an anomaly. The greatest purpose of this meeting was to make the dream world aware of the approaching danger. After finishing his tea, Roland turned his head and was about to tell Fei Yuhan that he planned to leave, but he saw her suddenly raise her right hand. Then, a dazzling silver light blossomed from her fingertips. Hey! Before Roland could dissuade her, the light had already split the table in front of him into two. Even the split teacup fell to the ground with a crisp, shattering sound. In that instant, everyone's eyes turned to her. Have you forgotten the original purpose of the establishment of the Martialist Association? Her voice wasn't loud, but her displeasure was unmistakable. For thousands of years, the awakened have gathered together to fight against the erosion, to protect this world from being devoured by the fallen evils. And what is the truth now? An even stronger enemy has appeared in the erosion. Prism City has been destroyed in an instant. The guardian of raging flames is dead, and the awakened are powerless to fight against it. In the face of such a crisis, don't you find it funny that you are discussing whether the other world can be trusted? Miss Fei Yuhan, don't forget your identity. The old man's expression changed. Rock stopped him from reprimanding further and asked in surprise, "Isn't that important?" "That's right," Fei Yuhan said without hesitation. "I only see one point. Martial artists can't defeat the oracles, but Roland can. Since he can't protect the world, isn't it natural to help the people who can protect this world? Please don't be mistaken, his explanation of magic power and the other world is only to satisfy your curiosity, and not to give you an excuse to doubt him. In other words, even if Roland is just an ordinary person, as long as he can kill the oracles that martial artists can't destroy, the association should fully support him and place him in a position that is as important as protecting the world. This is in line with the purpose of the association. Otherwise, how can we call ourselves the protectors of this world? It's precisely because God is difficult to defeat that we need the combined efforts of both worlds. Giving up in fear of the future is nothing more than a coward's way of doing things. Even if we fail in the end, we will still give it our all. Perhaps some people might doubt that the argument, martial artists can't kill an oracles, is not valid, and I can understand your thinking. After all, only Zero and I were present at that time. But I also welcome everyone to verify. At this point, Fei Yuhan's entire body was covered in silver light, and even her tone lowered a few degrees. As long as you are able to injure me to that extent in a one-on-one fight, I will take back my words. How about it? She swept her gaze across the crowd, her gaze as sharp as a knife's edge. For a moment, none of the higher-ups who were older or held higher positions than this genius martial artist were able to respond. As expected of a leader of the new generation. Rock suddenly laughed. He clapped his hands and said, "Indeed, I shouldn't hesitate on unnecessary matters and forget what the association should be focusing on. You're right. No matter where Mr. Roland comes from, his contribution to the association is unquestionable. Whether it's as a role model for newcomers or the number of fallen evils he has killed, he has given the association a boost in morale when it is rebuilding. Just based on this point, everyone shouldn't prejudge his position and speculate about him with malicious thoughts." The defender looked at the two and said with a sigh, "Ever since the fall of the Prism City, I once doubted whether humans could survive the catastrophe of the erosion. The current situation might be more serious than I expected, but at least everyone has a visible goal. As for the other world, we can slowly explore it after we resolve this crisis. What do you all think?" This is considered the most suitable response. That's right, we should first focus on defeating the enemy of the erosion. I agree. The voices of agreement gradually suppressed the voices of doubt. After all, eliminating the erosion was the top priority for the martial artists, and to overturn this conclusion, they had to first get past Fei Yuhan. Anyone who knew how tragic the ambush on the bridge was would know that it was not a good choice to stand out at this time. Even if they could win, it was only in terms of sparring. Even the old man reluctantly shut his mouth. Fei Yuhan retracted her force of nature and returned to her seat. She smiled at Roland. "See, I've done what I promised you." Roland could not help but facepalm. Her method was too reckless. Although it could temporarily unify the opinions of the people in the Prism City, it would inevitably cause dissatisfaction among many people. She could not be unaware of this, but she did not seem to care. "Why do you have to do it to such an extent?" "Because..." Fei Yuhan looked at her bandaged hand, looking a little depressed. I can only work harder in this area. Chapter 1367. Is it because she is unable to truly destroy the oracle and is disappointed? Roland did not know whether to comfort her or roll his eyes. A normal person's first reaction would be to rejoice, but Fei Yuhan was still brooding over the fact that she could not participate in a battle that could cost her life at any time. He had to admit that a genius train of thought was always different from ordinary people. The higher-ups of the association quickly came to a consensus. The information regarding the Battle of Divine Will and the Two Worlds was classified as top secret. Before the erosion crisis was resolved, the contents of the meeting were not to be disclosed to the public to prevent unnecessary panic. As for the definition of Roland's background and identity, they still needed to discuss further. According to Fei Yuhan, his importance was even higher than the association president's. This was not something that could be decided by Prism City alone. Sky City and the other association branches had to be informed and discussed together. This process would probably take a long time. However, in order not to delay the fight against the erosion, Prism City would provide all the convenience and support to Roland within its capabilities. Since the general tone had been set, the discussion after the meeting was about the specific contents of the support. All he had to do was wait for the results. As he walked out of the meeting hall with Fei Yuhan, Roland was surprised to find Valkyries waiting for him outside. She looked at the two for a moment before her gaze finally stopped on Roland. "I want to talk to you alone." Fei Yuhan smiled and took the initiative to say, "Then I'll leave first. Zero is still sleeping in the ward." After the genius martialist left, Roland followed Valkyries into the courtyard behind the building. Although it was winter, the courtyard was still lush with greenery. The grass on both sides of the stone path still had some snow that had not melted, and sharp green grass poked its head out, as if reminding people that the cold winter was coming to an end and a new year was coming. If it was for a stroll, this would be a good place, but Valkyries obviously did not bring him here to enjoy the scenery. "What are you trying to say?" Roland broke the silence. "You realize that your judgment was wrong and decided to believe me?" "No, I still can't believe you." Valkyries shook her head. "The outcome of the Battle of Divine Will concerns the future of our race. I will never make a decision without verifying it. As you can see, the Oracle is stopping me from finding the truth. Doesn't this mean that we are heading in the right direction? Even if I could fake the results of the Western Front, I couldn't have arranged all of this on purpose." "Indeed, I admit that," Valkyries replied calmly, "but my mind will not change." Roland stopped, annoyed. "You're helping the gods destroy their own civilization. It's meaningless to criticize based on unequal information. No matter what, the dream world and the real world are separated by the realm of mind." Valkyries turned around. "If it were you, would you have made up your mind to cooperate with the enemy you've been fighting for nearly 1,000 years? Besides, all I can get is a verbal promise." Roland opened his mouth, but he couldn't say a yes. He finally sighed. "If that's the case, then we have nothing else to talk about. I will never make a decision without verifying it, but..." Valkyries paused. "If I can verify the truth, I will reconsider your proposal." Roland was stunned. "What? When you treated Fei Yuhan, the woman who came in the carriage was an extraordinary, right?" she said slowly. "And she's different from the witches by your side. This difference doesn't refer to her ability, but her style of doing things. The former is unfamiliar to me, but the latter is rather familiar. In this world's terms, it's more or less the mark of an era. No matter how I thought about it, the only people I felt familiar with were the people from the first and second battles of Divine Will. After all, after the humans retreated to the borderlands, I never came into contact with you again. So can I infer that this which is not old and is still alive? He wasn't that old. That should be compared to devils that were hundreds of years old. With just a few encounters, she can infer that Scroll and the gods' punishment witches are not from the same era?" Roland replied non-committally. "What does this have to do with what you said? Even if you ask her and get the same answer, you will only think that she colluded with me. Of course it's related. The Union's witches only have a lifespan of 100 years. To be able to survive from the second battle of divine will until now, they must have borrowed the technology of the underground civilization. Ever since we were ambushed by your trap, I have repeatedly pondered how they could enter the dream world, and the only possible answer is the ruins of the underground civilization. Vaucries walked to an artificial water feature covered in thin ice and looked at her reflection in the water. Although the conditions are extremely harsh, this race's unique use of magic can indeed greatly reduce the difficulty of connecting to the realm of mind, and it's not surprising that the Union, which once occupied the fertile plains, excavated the ruins of the underground civilization. I originally thought that they gave up their bodies in reality and instead fixed their souls in the dream world. But when I saw that witch, I realized that I might have guessed in the wrong direction. To be able to allow a living extraordinary to freely enter and exit the dream world without any external help, this is no longer something that the magic technology of the underground civilization can achieve, Vaucries said to herself. I don't know what method you used, but at least I can confirm one thing. If the existing witches can use this method to enter the dream world, then it should be equally effective for the higher ascendants of my race. Don't tell me your plan is. Roland's heart skipped a beat. Let the Sky Lord come to see me. Vaucries raised her head. Even if you are the creator of the dream world, it is impossible for you to replicate a character that you do not understand at all. As the commander of the Western Front, Haxord will undoubtedly be able to verify all the questions I want to know. Roland blinked and could not help but laugh out of anger. That is a senior demon lord. If I could command it, would the First Army still need to fight in the kingdom of Wolfheart? Besides, it was previously ambushed by the humans and now doesn't even dare to show its face. Where am I going to find it? I will help you create this opportunity, she said word by word. Roland frowned. Are you serious? But you have to promise me two things. First, you must not use this opportunity to attack Haxord. Second, no matter what decision I make, you must let it go. Have you ever thought about how big of a risk this is for me? We are both taking risks. Vaucries said in a low voice. That's right. You think that this might expose the secret of human inheritance, but isn't it the same for me? If you go back on your promise and put a senior demon lord in danger, what else can I do but regret it? Don't think that I made this decision easily. Perhaps realizing that she was slightly agitated, she slightly calmed her tone. In short, this is the biggest compromise I can make. As for whether you want to take the risk, the decision is yours. Roland stared at her for a long time before asking, I want to know, what made you change your initial decision? Fearing a terrifying future and giving up on advancing is nothing more than a coward's actions. Even if we fail in the end, we will still do our best. Vaucries snorted softly. For a human to say such words, it really surprises me. That was Fei Yuhan's speech during the meeting. Was she standing outside the hall at that time? Also, you asked me a question at the beginning, right? Vaucries looked him in the eye. Do you think that the transformer, Heath Tully's from 1,000 years ago, did something wrong? Roland nodded. I don't think it did anything wrong. She turned and walked out of the courtyard. That is my answer. Chapter 1368. Delta and Epsilon have failed. Gamma looked up at the clock on the wall of the basement. It had been exactly 12 hours since the plan time. The death of the Oracle was not surprising. Being an enemy of the world creator was inherently filled with unpredictable risks. As long as they could complete their mission, death was not a big deal. As long as they had enough time, they would be reborn in the realm of God sooner or later. But in the past 12 hours, nothing had changed in this world. In the illusory space filled with magic, it did not even feel the slightest ripple, not to mention the entire realm showing signs of collapse. This could only mean one thing. The two of them had failed to complete their plan of killing the logical consciousness entity named Zero. Although it's regrettable, we still have our own mission to complete. Beta fused the last 5 cores into his body and suddenly opened his arms. A red light flashed, and then a bright red erosion rift appeared out of thin air in the middle of the basement. The situation has not reached the point of no return. As long as we can achieve our goal, there's still a chance. Let's go. The magic here will soon be exhausted, and the state of the two worlds overlapping will also be restored. Even a martial artist might be able to detect our traces. It did not even try to guess the process of the battle and the reason for its failure. As an oracle of God, it would not feel frustrated because of a momentary failure, nor would it care about the consequences of failure. The only thing on its mind was to do its best to complete God's will. Gamma nodded silently. Beta turned around and took the lead to step into the rift. This was not an ordinary erosion. It was a passage built after consuming a large amount of energy and the cores of fallen evils. And the other erosion rift connected to it led to the final battlefield set up for the main creator. Gamma followed closely behind. Just as it was about to enter the passage, footsteps suddenly sounded from the staircase. It was slightly stunned and turned its head to look at the source of the sound. This place was blocked by magic, and any detection methods were ineffective. There were also a large number of fallen evils guarding outside, so it was impossible for anyone to enter. Soon, the figure of the person appeared in the darkness. "Why is it you?" Gamma was extremely puzzled. It was Epsilon who had disguised herself as a human. According to the plan, it should be responsible for delaying the rescuers and buying enough time for Delta. If the latter didn't succeed, it was even less likely for Epsilon to survive. However, what it received was not an answer, but an arm with 5 fingers closed. The arm pierced through its chest at lightning speed. The mask fell to the ground with a clang, revealing the rotating astrolabe under the hood. Gamma looked at him in disbelief, and his consciousness quickly became sluggish. Why, there's indeed a difference. Epsilon retracted her hand and allowed Gamma to fall onto her. "You and Lon. You want to betray God?" After a moment of silence, Epsilon whispered, "Who is God?" "Yes." Gamma opened its mouth, but its voice kept repeating like a stuck phonograph. In the end, it could not give a definite answer. "That's right. We've never thought about such a question before, so we can't answer it. Ever since I killed Lon, I've suddenly had many thoughts. It's as though they've always been in my mind, but I've deliberately sealed them off. And one of them is this: did Lon really betray God?" Epsilon murmured in its ear. "And the conclusion is that I don't know. Oracles are the embodiment of God's will. If we go against this, can we still be considered oracles?" Gamma didn't reply, or it could be said that it could no longer speak. The following mission requires 2 people to complete, so it's the same no matter who it is. If you have the chance to meet His Excellency, please ask this question on my behalf. Epsilon opened up its robe and wrapped its companion up. After a squirming, it completely transformed into Gamma. Following that, it picked up the mask and wore it before walking into the erosion rift. After passing through the twisted passageway formed by magic, Epsilon opened its eyes again and saw a completely different scene. The barrel-shaped structure made of reinforced concrete stretched from the bottom to the top, like a magnificent tower. The interior of the tower was surrounded by layers of suspended walkways that were connected by a shuttle-shaped elevator. The walkways were evenly distributed with countless squares, and it knew that the things locked in those squares were their targets, the magic power cores that this world had stolen from God's domain. With these cores, the oracles had enough power to set up a trap to kill the creator. "Why are you so slow?" Beta looked back at it. "Let's begin when you're ready." "Of course, leave it to me," Epsilon replied calmly. For the rest of the day, Roland slumped over his desk, sighing. The series of sudden incidents in the dream world could be said to have overwhelmed him. Waking up didn't mean that he was free. Be it the memories from fusing with the astrolabe or the detailed conversation with Valkyries, all of them gave him a headache. Especially the former. Before entering the bottomless land and facing God, it was no doubt the only source of relevant information. From Lan's words, he could tell that the importance of the information was extraordinary. However, after pondering over it for a long time, he couldn't figure out the connection between the content he saw and the second scene. There was also a line of text that left him extremely concerned. From this moment forth, gravity is no longer the most revered force in this world. Why did it have to be gravity? Among the four forces of the universe, gravity was nothing special other than its wide range of effect. In terms of application, it was inferior to the electromagnetic force, and in terms of strength, it was far inferior to the strong interaction force. It was precisely because of its large macroscopic scale that it was the first fundamental force that civilizations paid attention to. This also meant that it had the least amount of mystery. According to conventional thinking, apart from being appointed, it was very difficult to treat it as the most revered force. As for the latter, after Nightmare Lord expressed her intention to cooperate, the two returned to the high-end restaurant where they first met for a full and frank conversation. This once again attracted the attention of other customers. According to Valkyries, once it confirmed the situation at the front lines, it would change its goal of winning the battle of divine will to completely stop the battle of divine will. This also included convincing Sky Lord to assist humanity in heading to the bottomless land. Compared to obtaining information from Sky Lord alone, the benefits of this cooperation were clearly much greater. However, the problem was whether Sky Lord was willing to be convinced was another matter. Furthermore, there was more than one senior lord among the demons. Above the senior lords, there was a king. It was ultimately uncertain if Haxord could decide the direction of the Western Front Army. Chapter 1369. Now, there were three choices in front of Roland. The first was to make use of the opportunity created by Valkyries to ambush and kill Haxord. The risk of doing so was almost zero, and it was equivalent to taking down a senior lord empty-handed. Considering the difficulty of advancing to a higher level and Haxord's special ability, this would be beneficial to the front lines. Then, he could push the reason for Haxord's failure to appear to be an accident or some other factor, and Valkyries might not be able to tell anything from it. If he was lucky enough, he might even be able to use the same method to lure the other senior lords. The second was to let Haxord enter the dream world and have a face-to-face conversation with Valkyries. As the latter had taken the initiative to push forward their cooperation, the crux of the matter was not the Nightmare Lord herself, but the person she was conversing with. The most ideal situation was for the Nightmare Lord to prove the truth and convince the Sky Lord to lead his army out of the human kingdom, and spread the news that the battle of divine will must be stopped to the demons. This way, there would be no more obstacles in the path from Everwinter to the bottomless land. As long as he eliminated the last oracle, he would be able to face God in the bottomless land. If this was a war between humans and demons, Roland would undoubtedly choose the former. After all, killing Haxord was a surefire way to gain an advantage in the war in the north. The longer the war dragged on, the more the potential of industrialization could be fully unleashed. But when one looked at the bigger picture, the situation became completely different. Apart from the demons and the Sky-Sea realm, the threat of God was right before their eyes, and a Sky Lord was an insignificant victory. Even if they won the battle of divine will, human civilization would not escape destruction. At the very least, Roland could not imagine how far they had to develop in order to survive such a terrifying natural disaster. Time was not on their side. It was probably because of this that Valkyries chose to take the risk. It had to be said that this action revealed a certain degree of sincerity. At the very least, after witnessing the erosion and the Oracle's attack, she had treated Land's warning as a top priority and seriously considered it. The problem was that the shapeshifters, the enlightener of Nightmare, had a great influence on Valkyries. It could be said that before the Battle of Divine Will broke out, it had already planted this idea in Valkyrie's mind. To be able to temporarily put aside the victory and defeat of a war and fight for the continuation of the race from a higher perspective was something that could be said to be a matter of course. However, Haxord had no experience in this aspect, and it was still questionable whether he could reach an agreement with Valkyries after the exchange. Generally speaking, this kind of decision that concerned the fate of a race was not something that could be decided in a single negotiation, and the more times they met in the dream, the more the risk would increase. This was something that Roland found hard to accept. For now, he was more inclined to the third option. that was to temporarily maintain the status quo and strive to rely on humanity's own strength to reach the bottomless land at the end of the continent. Frankly speaking, this option suited Roland the most, and it was also the goal that he had been working hard to pursue. No matter what the demons did, humans had the ability to cross thousands of kilometers to reach their destination, and it was undoubtedly the safest outcome. However, to the north of the Everwinter continent was a continuous mountain range. To cross the ridge of the continent, they had to develop an aircraft that had a range far greater than the fire of heaven, and at the same time, they had to have the ability to defend against aerial attacks. From development to production, this process would undoubtedly take up a lot of time, and it was also unknown if there would be any changes in the situation at the front lines during this period. Just as he had previously realized, in the face of the threat of the divine will, choosing the safest option was also a type of risk. The only difference from the previous two options was that the degree of risk in this option could more or less be compensated by the human's own efforts. The next time I enter the dream, I'll try to seek support from the association, Roland thought to himself. After dinner, Anna walked into the office with a scroll of blueprints and sat opposite the mahogany table. This was the time for the two of them to communicate, and it was also a rather relaxing and pleasant time of the day. As long as the research institute was not working at night, she would come to the office for 2 to 3 hours, chatting about the results of the day's work, to the whimsical ideas that suddenly popped up. At this time, Nightingale would also appear. She leaned against the coffee table and chewed on her snacks while flipping through the comic book that Scroll had copied from her dream. Occasionally, she would add a few words to the conversation. The atmosphere was very peaceful and warm. After solving the technical problems, Roland took the opportunity to talk about the problem that plagued him in the dream. "So this is what made you sigh incessantly?" Nightingale curled her lips. "Do the two have to be related in some way? What if the scene you see in the dream is just randomly pieced together? The more you think about it, the faster your hair turns white. Some people just don't understand." Roland rolled his eyes. "The brain will degenerate if you don't use it. If everyone is like you, then the world is finished. But if you continue thinking like this, it will only be finished faster than the world." He decided to take back his previous peaceful and warm opinion. Anna did not respond. She pondered for a long time before saying thoughtfully, "I think that this time, I'm afraid that Nightingale is right." Nightingale and Roland could not help but be stunned. Anna could not help but laugh. "I'm not talking about not thinking about it, but about the matter itself. The connection between the two scenes may not be as complicated as you think." "Did you find any clues?" Roland asked curiously. Anna shook her head. "It's just a guess. It might not be correct." She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and gazed at her notes. "For example, the sequence of the two scenes, or time. The connection is time?" Roland frowned and thought for a moment. After a moment, he said in surprise, "If the second scene happened before the first, they can be connected to form a complete story," Anna continued. "This is the price." The price was not referring to the radiation clan that rose into the sky and eventually disappeared. It was not referring to the survivors that were swallowed by the tsunami or the storm. The time scale between the two was tens of thousands of years, millions of years, or even more. The price was referring to something else. The result was that gravity was no longer worthy of respect, and a huge red hole appeared in the universe. If this line of words was referring to magic power, then, from this moment onwards, pointed to a shocking conclusion. Roland and Anna looked at each other. Magic power did not exist in this world. The two said almost at the same time. Without magic power, it meant that the creatures that needed magic power to survive no longer existed. For example, demons and witches. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1370. A World Without Magic Power? Nightingale was puzzled. Would the world be the same as it is now? "I think the two of you are thinking too much." Indeed. Anna came back to her senses. The influence of forces is mutual. Even the introduction of an inconspicuous force into a balanced system can bring about new changes to the whole system, not to mention the omnipresent magic power. If it really did appear halfway, then the world before it should have been completely different. But according to your description, this world is so similar to the world you once lived in. The water boils, the snow melts, the sun warms, and the earth nurtures life. Except for the absence of magic power, it's almost exactly the same. That's why it's worthy of respect. I think that's what that line of text was trying to express. Roland suppressed the chill that crept up his back. It's not within the framework of the four forces, but it can be seamlessly integrated into it and affect all aspects of the world, as if it's above all things. Is that really possible? Anna frowned. That's the only guess. Roland clenched his fist. And the appearance of magic power must have brought about changes, but the changes may not be what the other party expected. He paused. That's why it's called the price. It sounds a little scary. Nightingale could not help but twitch the corner of her mouth. No, it's actually a good thing. Huh? The world today is still full of magic power, which means that even the gods can't reverse the price. If that's the case, magic power will exist forever in the future, Roland explained seriously. And if magic power exists forever, you won't suddenly disappear. Ahem. Nightingale turned her head away. That seems to make sense. But it's already been more than 3 months since the months of demons, and no new witches have appeared. Who's to blame? Anna said with a faint smile. He was speechless for a moment. Okay, no more jokes? Anna chuckled. According to this inference, the start of the battle of divine will and the upgrading of the race all happened after the appearance of magic power and finally formed the world we're familiar with now? Logically speaking, you could say so. After all, the legacy shard and the realm of mind are closely related to magic power, and the various ruins that have been excavated in reality also prove that before we appeared, other civilizations once existed here. Roland heaved a sigh of relief. I'm more concerned about 2 things now. One is the sphere under the red hole that is gradually forming and being covered by prismatic light. The other is the liberation that the Oracle of Betrayal is seeking. You suspect that the former is the planet we live on? He nodded and said, it would be great if we could fly up there and have a look. Unfortunately, it's too difficult to verify this with Neverwinter's current level of technology. As for land's so-called liberation, it must be related to the suspension of the battle of divine will. However, as for what it means, I'm afraid I can only know after entering the bottomless land. Roland had originally thought that for a huge organization like the Martialist Association, even if they had reached a preliminary consensus, it would be an extremely long process to go through the procedures. It would take at least 10 days to half a month to come up with a proper constitution. Instead of waiting for the concrete results from the upper echelons, he might as well make a few requests, such as providing targeted technical information to Scroll, as well as conducting professional training for the tequila witches such as Saint Miron and Duo. However, the reality was far beyond his expectations. Just 1 day later, when he entered the Dreamland again that night, he received a call from Garcia. Mr. Rock's secretary wants me to inform you that the Prism City has already discussed and approved the first aid plan. The specific implementation of the plan requires your participation. The meeting will be held at the Clover Group's New Energy Automobile City Project Department. If there are no other arrangements, we'll set off now. Wait, Before Roland could react, the other party hung up the phone. Following that, there was a series of knocks on the living room door. Roland hurriedly put on his coat and opened the door. It was Garcia who was standing outside the door. Why does Rock's secretary have to inform you, and then you have to inform me? Roland was puzzled. Can't Mr. Defender just call me directly? Why did you have to come here? You really don't know anything, Garcia said grumpily. This represents the Martialist Association's recognition of you, and it's also the standard for high-level communication. Besides, there are many non-members of the association attending this meeting. If you go alone, won't you be a disgrace to the association? By the way, I'll be responsible for contacting people for such meetings in the future. Let's go when you're ready. I haven't washed up yet. She rolled her eyes. Then hurry up. Seeing that Garcia had no intention of leaving, Roland had to do as she said. However, when they went downstairs, they suddenly remembered that Garcia's luxury two-door car had been smashed into scrap metal during the last rescue. In the end, it was still the van that Roland was familiar with that drove the two out of the residential area. I'll pay for your car, he said awkwardly while sitting in the passenger seat. But driving this, won't it be a disgrace to the association? Shut up, Garcia said with a livid face. Roland tactfully looked away. After driving out of the urban area, her expression recovered a little. What happened before? Since it was to save a life, it can be regarded as extremely important, so I can let you go for the time being. As for what happened at that time, I'll also abide by the association's rules and won't ask you about it for the time being. Roland was startled and did not know what to say for a moment. After a while, he replied, Okay, thank you. But this doesn't mean that you'll write off what you owe me, understand? Garcia changed the topic and emphasized, after the confidentiality order is lifted, you must tell me everything that happened at that time, including Zero's identity and the real background of your relatives from the countryside. She had indeed noticed something strange. But this was also within his expectations. Garcia had been at the scene when Fei Yuhan was being treated, so naturally, she had witnessed the entire process of Fei Yuhan's near-death experience. Whether it was Scroll, who came with the enchanted sutures, or the god's punishment witches who did not seem surprised, they were obviously not ordinary people. Even so, she was still willing to wait for him to explain. This trust made Roland's heart surge with warmth. And Fei Yuhan rock. Under the influence of many people, this world was indeed heading towards the unknown. But it was precisely this unknown that was worth protecting. When everything is over, I'll tell you everything, he replied solemnly. After the car drove into the factory area, Roland discovered that the rather eye-catching signboard of the new Energy Car City project had disappeared and was replaced by a brand new gold-plated sign. His eyes widened in surprise. The words were clearly Grey Castle Design Bureau. Chapter 1371. That was not the only change in the factory. Roland noticed that many workers were dismantling the billboards on both sides of the road along the way. The noisy construction site was now quiet, as if the huge Auto City project had been emptied in the blink of an eye. Scaffolding had been set up inside and outside the low wall that was used to separate the construction site. It seemed that a new outer wall was going to be built on this foundation. What was more, he saw many armed policemen setting up cordons and checkpoints outside the project department. Anyone who entered or left the building had to be identified, and vehicles were not allowed to approach the project department building. After verifying his and Garcia's IDs, the policeman gave them a standard military salute and opened the gate for them. "Oh my God," Garcia whispered, "what did you ask the association to do?" "To be honest, I don't know more than you do," Roland said innocently, shaking his head. "I haven't asked for anything yet." As the two of them walked to the front of the building, Garcia's footsteps paused slightly, and she could not help but frown. Standing outside the door was her father, Guard, one of the members of the Clover Board of Directors. "I've been waiting for you for a long time." Guard nodded at his daughter and then stretched out his hand. "Mr. Roland, although I knew you were extraordinary the first time I met you, I didn't expect that you would exceed my expectations. From today onwards, this factory is yours." Guard was congratulating Roland, but there was not much joy in his tone. His expression was quite complicated, like a collection of contradictions. If the first time they met, the middle-aged man was obviously scornful, then the second time, because of his relationship with the Guardian, it had changed to a fake friendliness. This time, the emotions that he revealed were probably his true feelings. Isn't the new Energy Auto City a key project of the Clover Group? Is it really good to give it away like this? Garcia said sarcastically. "I thought the Clover Group would be more strong-willed when they tried to demolish the tube-shaped department in spite of public opinion." Surprisingly, Guard did not show any anger. Instead, he smiled bitterly and said, The Martialist Association has made an offer that our family can't refuse. Although I'm a member of the board, I can't stop this decision. In addition, the Clover Group has also officially suspended the demolition and reconstruction of the tube-shaped apartment. It will be announced at the press conference later. You don't have to wave flags for those residents anymore, daughter. Garcia was startled. The demolition is over? Yes, it's all over. Guard said slowly. I know you won't forgive me easily even if it's over, but at least we're no longer enemies. If you want to see your brother in the future, you can come to our house anytime. Of course. He looked at Roland. You can also bring him along. After sending the two of them into the hall, Guard waved his hand and left the department building. Before the two of them could react, the secretary in charge of receiving them had already brought them into the main conference room. There were 40 to 50 people sitting in a room of nearly 100 square meters. Almost everyone was dressed in formal wear. It didn't look like a meeting at a construction site at all. There were a total of 4 chairs at the head of the long table. Other than Guardian Rock, there were 2 other people sitting there. One was about 40 or 50 years old, with a capable face, and the other had grizzled hair, but his eyes were full of vigor. Obviously, the last chair was reserved for him. Garcia seemed to have woken up from her daze and gave him a gentle push from behind. Roland nodded, stepped forward, and sat beside Rock. After his experience as a king, he naturally wouldn't have stage fright in such an occasion. Instead, he became more and more curious. Judging from their behavior, it was obvious that the association was planning to give him a surprise. However, after the secretary announced the start of the meeting and introduced the participants one by one, Roland was left speechless. Although he knew that the Martialist Association had a long history and had a considerable influence on the government, this surprise was still far beyond his expectations. From metallurgy to materials, from mechanical design to automatic control, almost all of the participants were authoritative experts in their respective fields. Among them were academic masters from the National Academy of Sciences, as well as technical leaders from private companies. More importantly, these 40 to 50 people were just representatives. Each of them had a huge team behind them, and they could completely take care of the entire process from research and development to production. The 2 people sitting on his right were the Chief Technical Director, Director Wu, and the Administrative Director, Director Liu. The former coordinated the progress of various research projects, while the latter was responsible for the allocation of personnel and resources. The entire system was obviously professional, and the small team from the Design Bureau of Grey Castle couldn't compare. Because of this, the association had taken over this piece of land. Without enough land, it was impossible to carry out so many research projects at the same time. In addition, both of them were also representatives of the government and were among the few in the meeting who knew about the project. The whole project was named the Nuwa Project. It was very appropriate to use the legend of patching up the sky to fight against the erosion. However, because only a few government officials knew about the other world, the paper documents explained the project as a recovery drill. That was, assuming that human civilization would eventually be destroyed by the erosion, and the survivors would use the post-war resources to rebuild civilization on the ruins. One of the key reasons was that some of the awakened had undergone a rare mutation under the influence of the erosion and evolved special abilities that were very different from the existing force of nature. Therefore, any research project must take these factors into account. As for the specific appearance of the special abilities, it was up to the association's chief hunter, Roland. Seeing this, Roland almost spat out the tea he had just drunk. In other words, the main content of the meeting was to listen to him announce the abilities and discuss their uses. Even if he made it up, everyone had to seriously consider how the abilities would affect the reconstruction of civilization. It was fortunate that the Martialist Association was doing this. If he had announced this almost childish condition himself, perhaps half of the experts present would immediately leave. I wonder if Mr. Roland is satisfied with this plan? Rock looked at him and smiled. Previously, when you made that request to me, you said that it was extremely important to this world. I thought it was just an exaggeration, but now I understand the true meaning of your words. Considering that the manifestation of magic in the two worlds is different, no matter how strange your request is, they won't be able to raise any objections. Roland raised his eyebrows. You believe everything I said? To be honest, I don't know either. He retracted his gaze. But as long as we can work together to defeat the erosion, there will always be a chance to verify it in the future, right? And this brand new design bureau is just the beginning. The let go of that which comic is coming. Please stay tuned for more details. There will also be an official poster giveaway. Everyone can come and try your luck. Chapter 1372. The battle started quickly and ended just as quickly. When it stabbed its evolved tail hook into the center of another eye of branch nest, the outcome of the battle was already decided. The rapidly spreading neurotoxin would destroy the opponent's weak willpower, and the blades and legs that lost control would scatter in all directions. Looking at the collapsing body of the eye of branch nest, it retracted its tail hook in satisfaction. It used to be like these pitiful creatures, collecting aimlessly and waiting for the mother of the nest to decide their fate. Now, the latter had not changed much, but it had become the hunter of the nest eyes. Compared to its original appearance, its transformation could be said to be earth-shaking. Using the pheromone of some deep-sea fishes, it separated its eyes from its organs and attached them to its skin. At the same time, it evolved a shell filled with magic power around its ribs. This greatly improved its body's defense. Even if it encountered the detestable two-legged insect again, it would not be easily invaded. In addition, long-distance combat was obviously safer than close combat. Now, it could synthesize violent explosive elements in its body, which could be used to shoot gallstones and bone spears. Although it borrowed the structure of another low-level insect, it was much more effective overall. At least it did not rely on magic power when attacking, and it would not be disturbed by God's stone. In order to accommodate these organs, its entire body expanded more than 3 times, and ordinary blades could not do anything to it. Finally, it had a poisonous tail hook, which could not only give a fatal blow to a large target, but also preserve the intact body to obtain the pheromone. It was a weapon that killed many birds with one stone. Without a doubt, it could not be considered as the same kind of creature as the eyes of branch nest. In order to distinguish itself from its former self, it even learned from those insects and gave itself a name, Devour. Devour everything and evolve itself. And the eyes of branch nest scattered around the sea to collect pheromone were undoubtedly the most valuable prey. Next was the time to enjoy. Devour opened its shell, and countless tentacles surged out, slowly pulling the other into its body. At this moment, it suddenly felt an extremely strange fluctuation. The fluctuation was so great that it seemed as if the world was roaring at the same time. It looked at the sky. Apart from the dense dark clouds and the red moon hanging high in the sky, there seemed to be no change in the dome. However, in its eyes, the gray sky seemed to have set off ripples that continued to spread into the distance. A strong sense of uneasiness surrounded it. Whether it was the violent eruption of lava under the sea or the spontaneous tremors of the earth, they would all produce all kinds of fluctuations, but none of them were like what they were feeling now. It was too pure and full of rhythm, and that was why it was frightening. The ripples quickly dispersed into the sky. However, before Devour could recover from the shock, a familiar scent entered its body through its tentacles. This was an evolutionary command issued by the mother of the nest. Large amounts of orders were received by the central hub of the eyes of branch nest, and because of devouring, a new bridge was built. After losing contact with the main nest for so long, it did not expect to hear the call of the tribe again in this way. Not only that, but its body immediately identified the content of these pheromones and subconsciously wanted to execute them. It was no longer an ordinary nest eye. It was a unique entity. After spitting out the body of the eyes of branch nest, Devour rolled left and right to fight against the remaining instincts. Blade and Foot, who were guarding at the side, were so scared that they did not move. A few of them were directly smashed into meat paste by its sweeping tail hook, and the surrounding seawater also stirred up huge waves. Devour almost used all of its strength to control the impulse in its heart and forcibly suppressed the inducement of change. After catching its breath, it hesitated again and finally let foot fish up the sunken nest eye. After all, if it knew the evolution direction of the tribe, it would no doubt be more convenient when hunting other nest eyes in the future. It carefully pierced its tentacles back into the nest eye's central hub, feeling the will of the main nest and memorizing the instructions filled with pheromones one by one. However, the final result shocked him to no end. These instructions were a little too much. It should be known that evolution had always been a very serious matter. Any reconstruction could not be perfect in a single aspect, just like how flexibility was always the opposite of sturdiness, and high explosive meant low endurance. To achieve perfection, it could not be separated from the overall balance. It was precisely because of this that every time the main nest issued an evolutionary order, it would only make a decision after repeated analysis and screening, basically not more than 2 orders at a time, and the priority of the nest eyes was much higher than the secondary vassals. But this time, it read many evolutionary orders that affected both the nest eyes and the vassals at the same time. For example, endurance of pain, rapid blood clotting, rapid reproduction, sharp carapace, and so on. Some of the pheromones even came from the original fragments that had not been screened, which was completely different from what the mother of the nest had done before. Not only that, some of the orders even included the original beasts that provided the mutated pheromones, completely disregarding the consequences. Indeed, these evolutions could greatly increase the tribe's strength in a short period of time, but at the same time, it would also ruin the tribe's future. It still vaguely remembered the trend that was engraved in their bloodline. The ultimate goal of their evolution was not to continue, but to fly higher into the sky. But once the evolution was completed, the flaws brought by the inferior pheromones would be difficult to make up for, and the price was a little too high. It could not understand the basis of the mother of the nest decision. Fortunately, its fate had been completely separated from the tribe, and no matter what this change meant, it had nothing to do with it. After dissecting the nest eyes, Devour dived into the deep sea and soon disappeared among the waves. Is it too late? The guardian stood by the calm sea, gazing into the distance to the north. Shallow waves crashed onto the shore of the island, producing a monotonous and gentle rustling sound. But she knew that this was probably the last piece of this sea. The distant horizon was dyed a thick layer of dark red, and from time to time, she could see the arcs formed by magic flickering, as if a huge storm cloud was slowly forming. Soon, this bloody red cloud would reach the sky above the land of dawn, and become a part of the battle of destiny. And in another direction, a black wave rose from the surface of the sea. It stretched for hundreds of kilometers, like a moving reef. Under the guidance of the will of God, they would eventually converge. She had witnessed such a scene countless times. But this time, it would probably be the last time. Of course, it did not mean the end. For the entire world, it was nothing more than a new beginning. But that beginning was just another cycle of tens of millions of years, and the one watching over this place would no longer be her. She did not know if the little girl had successfully found her way back. She turned to look towards the south, and if only there was a chance to meet again in the future. Faster, she silently said in her heart. Chapter 1373. The meeting on Project Nuwa lasted for several days, and the professionalism displayed by the participants amazed Roland, but what surprised him even more was their energy. Arguments and debates continued throughout the meeting, often from 9 in the morning to 7 in the evening, and it was not unusual for them to argue until midnight when they encountered difficult issues. Although most of them were dressed in formal wear, they did not give an inch in the technical field, and the intensity of the debate was no less than that of going into battle naked. Not only were there industry backbones in their 30s or 40s, but even the gray-haired seniors were the same. When people reached this age, it was normal for them to be inarticulate and slow in thinking. However, other than their appearance, there was almost no sign of aging. Not only were their voices loud and clear, but their eyes were also bright and full of expression. When debating, they could often suppress the latecomers by a head. This made Roland believe that the brain was indeed an organ that developed the more it was used. In the dream world, he could still rely on the awakening force to maintain a high level of concentration, but after waking up, he would feel obviously tired. In order to deal with the contents of the meeting, he had to increase the number of times he slept, using the time in reality to replenish his energy. Of course, the atmosphere in the project department was not like this from the beginning. At least at the beginning, no one showed much interest, and the focus of the dispute was more on Roland's settings. For example, after the destruction of human civilization, the fallen evils degenerated into another type of competitor, as well as black fire, elemental purification, and other variants of the force of nature that obviously did not match the overall level of technology. Although no one openly questioned whether this was possible because of the Martialist Association and the government's leadership, there were occasional conflicts and responses. They either remained silent or repeatedly questioned the details under the guise of, for the convenience of work. And naturally, the tone used during the process was not very good. If Roland had not winked at Ling and the others several times, the tequila witches would probably have started fighting on the spot. It was not until the end of the first night that the conflict between the two sides reached its peak. A chief engineer who specialized in mechanical control stood up and said bluntly, no matter how much they discussed it, it was useless if they could not remember it. Just the matters that were decided in one day were enough for the Martialists to digest for several weeks, so it was better to end the meeting earlier next time. Roland clearly remembered that Scroll, who had been silent all this while, suddenly slammed her palm on the table. After that, the conference room became a stage for her to dominate. Not only was the content of the meeting discussed, but also who spoke up several times, how many questions were raised from the beginning to the end, and how much contribution was made to the project. This incredible memory ability shocked everyone present. The chief master who raised the objection was rendered speechless. For a moment, it was as if everyone present had become his students, and Scroll was his only teacher. Perhaps it was because she had confirmed the association's deduction that the force of nature had infinite possibilities and was not limited to strengthening the muscles of the limbs. Or perhaps it was because the engineering elites were naturally close to people with high intelligence. Coupled with Scroll's outstanding temperament and appearance, the situation was suddenly reversed. The next day, there were still occasional disputes, but the focus of the discussion had shifted from the settings to Project Nuwa itself. Not only that, in a situation where there was no shortage of money or manpower, every controversial point that came up in the meeting could be immediately transmitted to the research and development team, and they could test it on the spot to verify its feasibility. For Roland, this was undoubtedly the most rewarding few days in the dream world. According to the suggestion of the Chief Technical Officer, Director Wu, his current focus of improvement should be on the tools. The other party's original words were, even though we have extremely high-precision processing methods and reliable metal raw materials, we still use such a crude machine tool. It's really a waste. Even if we lack electronic control technology, we can use mechanical methods to achieve semi-automatic and precise control. If you had brought it up earlier, you wouldn't have had to put up with these defective products until now. Roland did not know whether to laugh or cry. The defective products that the other party mentioned were already the pinnacle of what he had learned in his life. However, he completely agreed with the director's evaluation. Before electronic technology was popularized, pure mechanical equipment had once been developed to the level of works of art. For example, mechanical computers and the difference engines that were developed from them, but ultimately remained on paper. Anyone who saw the layers of overlapping gears and interlocking screws would feel a sense of pure beauty. However, the advancement of electronic technology was like a torrent, sweeping these huge and complicated machines into the gutter of history in the blink of an eye. Even if he flipped through the textbooks, he would not be able to find the relevant equipment design knowledge. Now that there was a specialized team to improve the production tools for him and restore these originally vanished mechanical devices, he naturally could not ask for more. Once the level of the tools was improved, not only would it bring about an increase in production efficiency, but it would also reduce the need for manpower. This meant that Neverwinter could use the same number of workers to complete more work, which was very significant for a kingdom with a limited population. In addition to production machine tools, the new design bureau also provided many administrative tools, such as relatively simple mechanical calculators, typewriters, automatic printing presses, and so on. They basically did not need electronic components, and only a few of them could greatly improve the speed of administrative work. And this part of the content formed the foundation of Project Newa. The content built on top of this suddenly expanded by a lot. Most of the people in the meeting agreed that strengthening oneself was the most important task to protect the human race from extinction. They had to have the power to resist the degenerated fallen evils to have the capital to discuss the next step of development, so the second stage of the discussion mainly focused on weapons. Considering the conditions given by Roland, the participants did not directly propose a plan that would solve the problem in one step, but instead divided it into 3 steps: a quarterly plan, a 1-year plan, and a 5-year plan. Although the war history of the dream world provided the best answers to some questions, because the number of survivors in the setting was not enough to support a complete industrial system, it was obviously not practical to completely replicate history. Therefore, the experts were more inclined to focus on the development of the few projects that would bring the greatest benefits to the enemy. This was also the original intention of the first 2 plans, to bring about a radical change in the humans' combat ability within 3 months to a year. The first and easiest project to be mentioned was a variety of high-performance explosives and propellants. This was also the current biggest shortcoming of Neverwinter. If the production process of nitro gunpowder could still be glimpsed from chemistry books, then the information on simple explosives such as TNT and RDX was much less, not to mention the composition and ratio of modern composite gunpowder. Now that the official representative had started this gap could finally be filled. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1374. Secondly, there was the more advanced bullet processing line. Although the production line designed by Roland could be regarded as a streamlined process, it was not worth mentioning in the eyes of the military experts, who bluntly called it the level of a workshop. In their own words, such a product with relatively simple structure and process could completely replace 95% of the human work with machines, and with the help of mechanical control equipment, production could basically be achieved 24 hours a day. According to the military plan, the new production line would cost a lot of money, but it could save a lot of manpower, and at the same time increase the bullet production efficiency by more than 10 times. If the number of people engaged in the production remained the same, the increase in production capacity would be even greater. After the cornerstone project of the Newa project was in place, the equipment needed for the new production line would no longer have any theoretical technical difficulties. Together with the enhancement of the propellant, the accuracy and lethality of the guns would be further improved. Looking at this part of the report, Roland could only sigh in admiration at the accuracy of the expert's vision. The number of ammunition had always been the number 1 problem that troubled the First Army. The number of workers engaged in related production had been increasing since the expedition to the Fertile Plains, but the shortage of ammunition did not seem to be alleviated. For example, the Air Knight, who was a big consumer of ammunition, could use an astonishing number of bullets just by training, but the process could not be omitted. Roland had heard Iron Axe complain more than once about the front line. If the ammunition production capacity could be increased, the possibility of the demons breaking through the First Army's defense line with their advantage in numbers would be further reduced, or in other words, they would completely lose the ability to fight the demons head-on. As for the related light weapons, the expert group did not put forward any more suggestions. It was not that there was no room for improvement, but that the cost-effectiveness of the improvement was not high. The combination of general-purpose machine guns and bolt/semi-automatic rifles was temporarily enough to deal with the threat of the degenerated fallen evils. As for the offensive tasks on the battlefield, it should be handled by heavy weapons such as cannons. In other words, as long as the enemy was flattened, the infantry could easily occupy the territory. Instead of spending resources on improving the guns, it was better to manufacture more cannons, and all actions would be carried out by cannons. Whether it was attacking, retreating, reinforcing, or blocking, they would first fire a few shells and plow the ground. Of course, this was only for the immediate and effective quarterly plan. In the 5-year plan, individual light weapons would undoubtedly become a very important item. As for Roland, what he was most interested in was the 1-year plan. Its benefits were slightly lower than gunpowder and bullets, and the resources needed to be invested were also relatively more. However, it was the key to determining the outcome of a war. The plan covered the existing heavy weapons in Neverwinter, including 2 major improvement projects and 2 new projects. The Army and the Air Knight would each take half of the projects. First, it was the old subject of the Grey Castle Design Bureau, the Caterpillar tractor and the armored tank that was developed from it. This was also the only occasion where Master Xie could show his face. Surprisingly, after looking at the design drawings, the experts didn't criticize it as being useless. Instead, they thought that under the conditions of low technology, the plan had some merit. Compared to the equipment itself, they were more concerned about the nuclear power center. When Roland took out the magic ceremony cube, the atmosphere in the hall took a turn for the better. Even the 2 government representatives who knew the inside story were dumbfounded. Even now, he could still clearly remember the scene at that time. Looking at the seemingly ordinary stone cube, everyone had a complicated look on their faces. After all, the background setting was the background setting, and they could accept it for scroll's sake. However, if Roland took out a stone and claimed that it was a nuclear power unit, he would be treating the experts as fools. Rock winked at him, and Director Liu decided to temporarily adjourn the meeting to avoid further awkwardness and ruin the cooperative atmosphere that they had painstakingly built up. But under his insistence, one of the chief engineers reluctantly sent it to the test room to let the team do a simple output test. When the chief engineer's assistant left, he looked confused and disgusted. However, half an hour later, when he rushed into the conference room, he was so excited that he couldn't even speak. Then, the whole conference room went crazy. In the face of the indisputable facts, Roland found that everyone was looking at him with a burning gaze. Director Wu even dragged Director Liu out of the conference room. No one knew what they talked about outside, but the most obvious change was that the security in the factory area increased by more than 1 level the next day. All the armed police were replaced by regular soldiers, and there were even sentry boxes and barracks set up at the gate. If it weren't for the fact that ordinary martial arts were useless to Roland, he would have had a private car to clear the way and bodyguards to protect him. He wasn't trying to show off, but it was Anna's idea. After telling her about what happened the day before the meeting, she was quite annoyed. Then she raised her eyebrows and came up with a revenge plan, which was to use magic power to reshape the other party's worldview. The result was better than Roland had expected. After that, not only did everyone respect Scroll, but they also agreed to all of his requests, hoping that they could get a piece of the magic ceremony cube to experiment on. The meeting ended later and later. With a tangible object, it wasn't difficult for a team with the support of modern technology to design a workable basic plan. Just like that, the original 3-cylinder magic cube was eliminated. In its place was a more reasonably designed high-pressure magic cube machine with higher pressure in the cylinder. Not only had its theoretical output power more than doubled, but its volume and vibration had also been reduced by nearly 30%. It would be loaded on the replicated heavy-duty trucks and tractors for practical testing. The final project plan could be determined in a week at most. In addition to the improvement of the Rubik's Cube engine, the project team also provided a drawing of a small truck. This kind of truck had only 20 to 30 horsepower and was driven by an inline diesel engine. The fuel was the leftovers from the biplane's fuel extraction. The total load was between 1 and 2 tons. The structure was extremely simple, and it did not even have a cab. At first glance, it looked like a square tractor with 4 wheels. Roland soon realized the use of this small truck. In terms of production difficulty, it was much easier than a steam truck, and it could be produced in large batches in a short time. The former was undoubtedly a waste for short-distance transportation, while the latter was just right. It was much more efficient than horses and mules, so it was undoubtedly the most suitable choice. The last part of the one-year plan was the core of the core. It consisted of two subprojects. The first was to improve the fire of heaven, to further increase its advantage against flying devil beasts, and on this basis, develop more submodels to suit different combat needs. The second was to develop a new long-range bomber. Chapter 1375. It wasn't that the project team didn't mention a brand new fighter. Without considering electronic equipment, the upper limit of a monoplane was higher than a biplane, but in the end, the one-year plan was still mainly about modifications. The person who made this judgment was Director Wu, the person in charge of technology. Roland also learned a new concept from the meeting: time efficiency. Any engineering product on the assembly line would increase its production efficiency over time. Even if there were no changes to the product itself, this phenomenon would still occur spontaneously. The reason was that processing was a skilled job. The workers would gradually familiarize themselves with the operation of the production line, including the interaction between humans and machines, as well as the interaction between humans. This had nothing to do with one's accomplishments. It was more of a natural tendency to slack off. Everyone would take the initiative to find the easiest shortcut to complete a task, and even improve the unreasonable parts of the process themselves. Therefore, the production speed and quality of an industrial product in the later stages were not only much higher than in the earlier stages, but the cost would also be much lower. If he wanted the Space Knight to reach a certain scale as soon as possible, then the production lines that had just been set up with great difficulty should remain the same for the time being. This would help the workers familiarize themselves with the processing and operating process of the machinery so that the equipment would not be a burden to the war. The improvements to the Fire of Heaven mainly focused on the modification of the hull, a more powerful engine, and a new weapon system. Needless to say, the Fire of Heaven was a product that Roland had come up with based on his experience and the antique blueprints in his dream. Even though aerodynamics were not a problem for a biplane with a top speed of no more than 150 km per hour, it did not mean that there were no benefits to it. On the contrary, with the support of wind tunnel and simulation technology, work such as modifying the airfoil was the least costly and the easiest to improve. The engine was obviously the most important. As the saying went, as long as there was enough power, even a brick could be supermobile. Once the power was increased, the other improvements would come naturally. However, even the most basic piston engine had to take into account the low level of technology after the apocalypse, as well as its durability and performance. It was not an easy task to design. It was said that the relevant team had come up with 7 or 8 trial production plans in one go. As for which engine to choose as the best solution, it would still take some time to determine. The new weapon system, on the other hand, did not have as many concerns. To put it bluntly, the technical content was not high. The military had a bunch of mature but already obsolete plans, such as 20mm autocannons, detachable aircraft bombs, and so on. What to install and how to install depended on the first 2 improvements. They were content that could be added at any time. According to the technical specifications given by the project team, the Type 2 biplane would have a cruising speed of 250 km per hour, could carry 2 auxiliary fuel tanks of 100 kilograms, and had a range of more than 1,000 kilometers. Furthermore, both the climbing speed and the elevation limit were much higher than the Fire of Heaven. This meant that the improved wings could rush from the rear to the front line within a day, or directly fly from the front line to the Great Rift on the ridge of the continent. Taking into account the rugged topography of the impassable mountain range, which made it difficult for ordinary troops to pass through, this parameter was undoubtedly extremely important. Finally, there was the bomber. It was the costliest and most controversial project of all. It took them half a day just to discuss whether this kind of special aircraft was needed to deal with the regressed fallen evils. The reason of the opponents was simple: biplanes could also bomb ground targets, but it was just a matter of carrying fewer fuel. However, the large bomber required a more professional landing site and more maintenance personnel, which would definitely put a lot of pressure on the logistics. In addition, although it scored higher in bombing, it needed fighter jets to escort it, which reduced the efficiency of the Air Force as a whole. The Flying Devil beasts had limited means against the agile fighter jets, but it was a different story for the clumsy bombers. As long as it was a reckless crash, it could cause serious damage to the aircraft. Furthermore, there were special fallen evils similar to martialists among the enemies, which increased the uncertainty of the risk. After all, the price of losing a bomber was much higher than a biplane. And with the remaining human resources, it was a question mark how many large bombers could be built. Finally, it was Roland who insisted on protecting this project. Under the circumstances of low technical standards, it was indeed lacking in various aspects. It was unable to come and go without a trace, and was capable of both offense and defense, but he had his own considerations. That was, Neverwinter needed a body that could travel long distances to launch an attack on the bottomless land when necessary. No one knew how far the dream world was from the erosion of the god's domain, and God would probably not remain silent forever. According to Lon, he needed to enter the divine domain from both worlds at the same time at that moment. If the dream world suddenly opened a passage to the erosion, and he was unable to quickly reach the bottomless land, then all his previous efforts would be for naught. Of course, braving the demon's attacks and heading to the enemy's territory was a helpless choice, but having a choice was better than having no choice at all, and the bomber was the most feasible plan under the current technological conditions. The other point was Project Glory of the Sun. With the Fire of Heaven's capacity, it was impossible to shoulder such a heavy responsibility no matter how many improvements were made. Without a means to throw it, even if a feasible explosive device was developed, it would be of limited use. Of course, it was not impossible for the Seagull to be launched at high altitudes with the Hummingbird's reduced weight, but as such, the detonator could not be equipped with God's stones of retaliation. During the long descent, it would be extremely vulnerable to damage from the senior demons. For example, if it was discovered by Sky Lord Hacksword, it would be troublesome once he used the teleportation portal to teleport it elsewhere. Therefore, the safest method was to directly create a magic forbidding body and rely on the Air Knight to launch it. And this was inseparable from a plane that could carry a larger amount of ammunition. The project team's initial plan was a 4-engine single-wing bomber. The engine needed to be specially developed, and 4 engines was to increase redundancy. Even if 1 or 2 engines malfunctioned, it could still return safely. Just from the rendering alone, the bomber looked like a giant beast with a wingspan of more than 30 meters. The tail was forked into 2 fins. Although the stable aerodynamic layout reduced the maneuverability, in exchange, it allowed for a longer range and easier operation. When it took off with full fuel, it could carry about 4 tons of ammunition and fly for more than 2,000 kilometers. Without considering the return flight, this number could be doubled, and it was enough to satisfy Roland's request to cross the ridge of the continent. However, its complexity far exceeded that of the Fire of Heaven. Even with the project team's specialized guidance, it was unlikely to be produced in an assembly line. In other words, its production rate would not be high. But at the very least, it gave humans the capital to light up the glory of the sun. Please remember this book's original domain name. For mobile version website M. Chapter 1376. Also, to answer the suggestions of my friends, the plot has been following the general outline. I'm not deliberately speeding up the ending, nor do I want to give the story an ordinary ending. There's a certain degree of challenge in writing this way, but as my first book, there's no harm in trying, right? Thank you for your continued support. Let go of that which, take a day off currently in the middle of typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 1377. After the meeting, the 2 government representatives asked Roland to stay behind and promised that the government would further promote more assistance projects, including the experimental data of the first generation of nuclear weapons. Of course, it was not just the Martialist Association that made them make such a promise. The magical creations with magical effects were also an important reason why the government was so proactive. In short, just as Defender Rock had said, this meeting was only the beginning. In just a few days, the design bureau of Grey Castle had filled in all the gaps left by Neverwinter's development. Hundreds, even thousands of people worked on each project to think about and perfect it. The battle of divine will was no longer the fate of the world. For the first time, Roland deeply felt that the surviving human beings were not fighting alone. They were supported by a force that could not be ignored. Although the two worlds had never come into contact with each other, they were closely connected by fate. Taking advantage of this round of technological reform, Roland ordered the administrative office to increase the recruitment of workers. He also planned to build more than 10 new factories to produce various new products, ranging from high-performance composite gunpowder to semi-automatic machine tools. After solving the population and economic constraints, Neverwinter, which was in a period of rapid development, could completely build and develop itself according to Roland's will. At least, this momentum would not stop until the main contradiction of survival was resolved. Just as the technological reform was carried out vigorously, Roland suddenly received an unexpected and pleasant news. Joan, who had been missing for nearly a year, had returned. After receiving the news, he and Nightingale immediately rushed to the first medical hospital of Neverwinter. Since last winter, when the government decreed to expand the scale of public education and medical care in King City, the administrative office had built 3 more hospitals in the south bank of the Redwater River, the central section of Kingdom Avenue, and Long Song Stronghold. These hospitals were responsible for simple diagnosis and epidemic prevention in each district. The West City Hospital, which was the first to be transformed from a noble's mansion and famous for Miss Nana's permanent residence, naturally received the title of First Medical Hospital. Walking into the ward, Camilla Derry slightly bowed to him. Vendy and Tilly had returned to the front line, and Scroll was busy copying the information. The chief butler of Sleeping Island naturally took over the task of taking care of everyone. Moreover, she had witnessed Joan's disappearance with her own eyes and had always felt guilty. Now that she had found Joan again, she was more excited than anyone else, which could be seen from the way she took the initiative to bow to Lin Sanjiu. After all, she had always believed that she was the one who snatched Tilly away, which was also the main reason for Ash's death. If not for the intelligence that the Sky-Sea realm could directly threaten the fjords and Sleeping Island, she would never have moved to Neverwinter. Roland didn't care too much about this. He waved his hand and asked softly, "How's her condition?" "I can only say, it's not a big deal." "Only?" Roland was puzzled. From his point of view, being able to return safely was already the best outcome. She is back to her old self. Camilla stroked Joan's hair and sighed softly. It was only after listening to her story that Roland finally understood what she meant. Joan didn't swim back to the shallow port by herself. The first person who found her was a Neverwinter fisherman. According to the man's report, when he went out to the open sea to fish, he was suddenly awakened by the sound of a heavy object hitting the stern of the ship, followed by the sound of chewing. He thought that he had encountered a sea ghost and was about to fight to the death, but he didn't expect to see a big fish that looked like a human. At that time, she was holding the fish that was boiling in the pot and gnawing fiercely, as if she hadn't eaten for several days. Seeing the panic of the fisherman, she didn't attack. Instead, she let out a few strange cries and then curled up in a corner of the deck, as if she had fallen asleep. Influenced by Neverwinter's long-term propaganda, the fisherman brought her back to the shallow port with the mentality of giving it a try. The reward for saving a witch was much higher than a boat of fish. To encounter a witch in the vast sea, if it wasn't a sea ghost, it could only be a witch. And this big fish was Joan. Lily has already examined her. There are many parasite infections all over her body, and some of the worms can't be eradicated with my ability, Camilla said sadly. In order to get rid of the hidden danger as soon as possible, I fed her sleeping fern and used a knife to cut out the shelled worms that were embedded in her skin. In theory, these bugs will only appear on old ships and giant whales. In other words, Joan didn't swim back from the Shadow Islands? They wouldn't have been infected at that distance. Camilla shook her head. And with Joan's speed, it wouldn't take her so long to return from the ruins to Neverwinter. I'm worried that she experienced something terrible that caused her to return to her old state. She didn't have time to clean up the parasites. She was so hungry that she went on the ship to look for food, and she was so tired that she almost fainted. All of these indicated that the journey was full of danger. In the case of long-term excessive stress, witches were likely to suffer irreparable psychological trauma. Maggie was a typical example. Camilla had the ability to communicate with her mind, so she was not afraid that Joan wouldn't be able to speak. What she really worried about was that Joan would never recover and would have to spend the rest of her life like an animal. Roland could not help but fall silent. Indeed, physical health did not mean mental health. Neither Nana's medical bandages nor Lily's purifying water could cure psychological blockages. Suddenly, a rhythmic knock on the door broke the silence in the room. Nightingale turned around and opened the door, feeling puzzled. She saw Mystery Moon's head poking out from the crack of the door. I heard Joan's back? Wait, hey, don't push me. The door was suddenly pushed open, and several people stumbled into the room. Apart from Mystery Moon, Summer, Sharon, and Amy were also there. Lily was the last one to enter the room. I can't help it. She found out, Lily said helplessly. Ahem. First of all, I only came to visit Joan because I heard she was sick. Mystery Moon said firmly. Although she belongs to the exploration group, Lightning and Maggie aren't here, so we're the only ones who can accompany her. I'm not trying to pull her into the detective group, and I don't, Summer had already covered her mouth with her hand. It's just her own delusion. It's none of our business, Sharon said with a righteous look. Hey, isn't it good to have one more member? Amy touched the back of her head in surprise. Shoo. Lily made a shushing gesture. Looking at the group of people fighting among themselves, Roland could not help but smile. He looked at Camilla Derry, spread out his hands and shrugged. Camilla was slightly stunned, and then her expression relaxed a lot. Maybe Joan had indeed encountered something terrible, but with this group of people accompanying her, he believed that she would get back on track sooner or later. Hey, look at this. What's this? It looks like a piece of silk. Why would there be silk in the hospital? Moreover, I can tell that the material is of high quality. Why don't we ask Aunt Camilla? Why don't you ask? I don't dare. I heard it all. Camilla, who was sitting on the edge of the bed, put her hand to her forehead and said, That's the cloth Joan used to bandage her wound. Be careful of the germs on it. Didn't His Majesty say not to touch a possible source of infection? After Roland and Nightingale left, only Camilla and the members of the detective group were left in the ward. The latter busied himself around the hospital bed, and he had helped a lot throughout the day. It was a good thing that Joan had such warm-hearted friends. The only problem was that they talked a little too much. There are germs on it? Lily, can you sense it? Take it away from me, in front of me. Hey, don't tear it. I can't tear it. Sharon, help me. It seems hard to tear it. Summer, do you want to have a try? No, she corrected herself. These guys didn't talk a little too much, they talked too much. Just as Camilla was about to ask them to return to the castle with the excuse of, It's late today, come back tomorrow, Joan's eyelids suddenly twitched. She hurriedly held her breath. A few seconds later, the sleeping girl slowly opened her eyes. Joan opened her mouth and let out a weak cry. The room instantly fell silent. She really couldn't speak. Camilla suppressed her regret and put her hand on Joan's chest. In an instant, countless fragments of consciousness flooded into her mind like a tide. The moment she asked a question, she immediately received an answer. This was the resonance of the soul. She saw herself being stretched infinitely in the dark bottom of the sea, like a distorted illusion. She saw the sky and the sea turning upside down, and the seawater pouring down from the sky. She saw black rib monsters all over the sea, forming wave after wave, charging toward the mainland. She saw layers of stone tablets in the misty water and the woman in white walking toward her. The last thing that entered his sight was a vast, bottomless, circular hole. Chapter 1378. The sinkhole you saw really looked like this? Roland stood up in surprise. I'm sorry. Camilla was slightly embarrassed. My drawing skills are only at this level. The scene on the table was drawn by the butler according to Joan's memory. However, it was not comparable to Scroll and Soroyas. Even the apprentices in the art studio were far from it. The densely packed short lines were the grassland, the crooked circles were the sinkholes, the uplifted slope was the mountain, and the wavy lines represented the seawater. To an outsider, it was no different from a simple drawing and could not be used as a reference. But Roland was different. He had once seen the legendary bottomless land in his dream. It was also the endpoint of the Battle of Divine Will, the passage for the victorious race to advance. Even though it was eventually engulfed by tsunamis and volcanoes, and the towns built on it were all destroyed, the general topography did not change much. For example, one side was flat while the other was bulging, and the distant towering continent could be vaguely seen. Before seeing it with their own eyes, it was always an illusory legend. After all, the northern end of the Land of Dawn stretched for thousands of kilometers. The humans before the Union were unable to draw a detailed map of it, and whether it even existed was a question. From the beginning to the end, only Lon had mentioned the location of the bottomless land. And now Joan's experience had turned it into a reality. No, this is enough. Roland could not wait to take out the large map from the bookcase and spread it on the floor in front of the table. He then placed the map in the direction of the northeast of the continent. It's probably here. What exactly is that? Camilla could not help but ask. I don't think it's a naturally formed sinkhole. Why would you think so? Roland asked. It's obvious. She crossed her arms. How can a sinkhole be so regular? And that strange seabed, the land and seawater in the sky, it's weird no matter how I look at it. Roland pondered for a moment. I feel that there's no such thing as natural. What do you mean? For example, the misty forest and grassland to the west of Neverwinter used to be a wasteland, but a bird brought seeds here and gradually evolved into what it is today. As long as enough time passes, such a hypothesis will definitely be established. However, later generations believe that this is the inherent appearance of the world. Don't you find it strange? Camilla frowned. I don't understand what you're talking about. Roland sighed inwardly. These principles were indeed too complicated for the people of the current generation. It was normal for them to be unable to understand. I see. Nightingale, who was chewing on dried fish, suddenly clapped her hands and said, What you're trying to say is that we're no different from birds and beasts, right? Is this a riddle? The butler rubbed his forehead, feeling a headache coming on. Think about it. Nightingale pointed at the city in the night outside the window and said, Birds brought seeds here and formed the forest and grassland. Humans moved to the North Slope Mountain and built Neverwinter. For this world, the essence should be the same. The so-called natural is only from our point of view. Even a bird wouldn't think that the branches of a tree are more natural than the eaves. Otherwise, why would it build its nest on the ladder? According to this inference, the circular sinkhole and the countercurrent are all part of the natural world, just like the misty forest and Neverwinter. She paused for a moment and said, Maybe the moon and stars above our heads were formed in the same way. Camilla was stunned for a moment. Roland raised his eyebrows in surprise. Camilla was obviously a bad student, but she was exceptionally sharp in some aspects. Should he say that it was because of her jumpy personality or because she was an idiot with a broader mind? He recalled the scene where the stones kept hitting each other and finally converged into a planet. God brought magic power to this world. From that moment on, the world had embarked on a completely different path. Let's go back to your previous question. He cleared his throat and roused Camilla from her daze. The island that Joan arrived at should be the bottomless land, and the black hole should be the pathway for the advancement of the race. When the relics of God become one, the path to heaven will appear, but it will definitely not be true liberation, nor will it win the smile of God. But we still need to go there. The bottomless land is the place closest to the divine domain. Perhaps there is a way to escape the battle of divine will. Camilla widened her eyes as though she wanted to blurt out, "Where did you learn of these things?" But she ultimately held back. As for the floating continent, I'm guessing that it's most likely the sky-sea realm that the demons speak of. Roland turned around and picked up a pen holder, placing it west of the Land of Dawn. Due to certain reasons, a distorted spatial passageway has formed at the bottom of the shadow waters. The other end is connected to the sky-sea realm, which is why Joan was able to instantly move from the Shadow Islands to the other side of the sea. In fact, it's not just her, the bottom of the two seas are also connected. Every once in a while, large amounts of seawater will pour into the sky-sea realm, and then fall back down, forming the waterfall that Joan saw. Camilla was surprised. Could this be the reason why Thunder saw the seawater crossing the ceiling, forever flowing from high to low? I'm afraid so. He nodded. There's no need for the seawater to flow back, because the high and low sides are connected. Similarly, the rapid ebb and flow of the tides has nothing to do with the celestial bodies, and only depends on the frequency and number of passageways open. You mean there's more than one sea region like the Shadow Islands? To make the entire Maelstrom Sea rise and fall, just one passageway is probably far from enough. As for whether there are ruins of ancient civilizations in those places, it's unknown. Roland felt the puzzle pieces in his mind coming together. And the stone tower ruins in the middle of the Shadow Islands should be looking at the sky-sea realm. Then what's the meaning of the door seen in the observation mirror? Nightingale interrupted. Perhaps only the builder knows. He shook his head. But we can boldly speculate that it might be a watchtower. The ruins have been under the water for a long time, and to be honest, it's not a good observation point. So, could it be that a long time ago, the terrain of the Shadow Islands wasn't as low as it is now, and the sky-sea realm wasn't as high? Until the Battle of Divine will changed everything, and the Watchers and the Watched no longer exist. Only the magic-guided observation mirror still keeps a close eye on the original target, and it hasn't changed to this day. With all due respect, this is a little too unbelievable. Camilla gasped. Changing the height of two continents? Do you know how much this will affect the entire sea region? It could probably kill all the land creatures. Roland could not help but think of the waves that were taller than mountains. Perhaps this was the original intention of God. Of course, these are all my guesses and you can't treat them as facts. He suppressed his distracting thoughts and changed the topic. Finally, there's the Black Continent in the northeast of the Land of Dawn. Joan saw countless sea monsters attacking it. Based on the analysis of the information obtained, it should be the territory of the demons. He walked to the top of the map and wrote the name Vaucres mentioned on the carpet with a charcoal pencil. Blackstone Region. Bookseller's website. Chapter 1379. Does what the world looks like? Camilla seemed to realize something. That's right. If you roll up the floor, it will be a map of the world. Roland put down his pen and looked at his feet in a daze. Perhaps it was a coincidence, but in history, there was a fleet that set off from the Spanish port of Barros. After sailing for 70 days and nights, they finally arrived at the New World of America, thus rewriting the map of the world. Now, Joan had used the same method to find out the general shape of the world for the first time. Although the two had different intentions, these discoveries were real. Not only would history remember Joan's name, the exploration group would also probably live up to its name because of her circumnavigating the world. But that was only in the general sense. To Roland, accurately locating the bottomless land and the sky-sea realm was undoubtedly the most important thing at the moment. Especially the former. Joan's discovery allowed him to confirm that the realm of mind was not as far away as he had imagined. This was obviously good news. At the very least, the new bomber plan and the improved Fire of Heaven had a clear goal in terms of the performance parameters. Of course, the sky-sea realm, which was located above the ocean, was somewhat beyond their reach. Fortunately, they were fighting with the demons. Even if they were to head east, they would first land on the west coast of the Land of Dawn, which was still a distance away from the fertile plains. Then there's only one question left. Nightingale scoffed. Who was the woman Joan met on the island? There are no signs of humans living there. If she's really someone from God's faction, there's no reason for them to help her, right? Roland was silent for a moment. In fact, I'm afraid that's the worst problem. Why? Camilla was puzzled. In theory, if the battle of divine will ends in destruction regardless of victory or defeat, then God is our enemy. He said with some hesitation. But the Guardian did not show any hostility. Either their concept of good and evil is completely different from ours, or they don't care about us at all. This kind of care is probably like how we bandage an injured bird. The two witches looked at each other and were momentarily stunned on the spot. But what followed was a chill that went deep into the soles of their feet. Everyone knew that if a flock of birds stole grains, humans would not hesitate to kill them, but no one would treat birds as real enemies. Occasionally, they would snatch 1 or 2 nestlings from the claws of cats. The latter had nothing to do with good or evil, it was just a personal preference. The Battle of Divine Will had gone on for many rounds, and countless races had been destroyed under the watchful eyes of the Guardians. The gods would not hesitate at all when it came to the survival of civilizations. Although they had saved Joan, it did not mean that humans were a special kind of race. "This is too scary," Camilla Derry murmured. "I hope I'm wrong." Roland sighed. "But since we're going to stop the battle of divine will, I'm afraid we won't be able to escape God's wrath. This is the price. Stop your foolishness. You have no idea what you are doing. Everything will return to nothingness. Millions of years of accumulation will also be destroyed. You can't afford such a crime." Every single sentence echoed in his ears like a miniature version of time. He had paid such a price to keep the battle of divine will going. How could he stop it so easily? Whether in reality or in the dream world, this struggle was inevitable. At the Sedimentation Bay Pier in the kingdom of Wolfheart. This place had once been occupied by demons, and the densely packed residential area was now a wreckage. However, as the First Army was gradually equipped with weapons, and the demons were caught unprepared by the attack of trucks and cannons, the demons were forced to retreat from the port city in just 1 month. The mist storage tower in the square, which had been smashed by the stronghold's cannons, was proof of this. The demons had driven humans to transport pieces of neatly cut obsidian from the north, and the inferior demons, who did not need the red mist, piled them up into towers until they connected with the towers in other cities, forming a dreadful area of dense mist. However, before this plan could be realized, the half-built mist storage tower had already collapsed in the roar of cannons. As the humans gradually launched a counterattack, the demons' control over their territory was visibly declining, and the once extinct fugitives showed signs of recovery. Even though the city was dead, the port became busy again. Even though the demons had destroyed most of the roads and bridges before they retreated, the construction team was still able to build temporary roads within a week. For those who had escaped the red mist with great difficulty, this was undoubtedly a fortunate thing. However, not everyone who fled to the south thought so. "Damn it, the rumors were actually true," Negan Murray said hatefully as he looked at the checkpoints set up on the road. "I had wanted the demons to deal with the troublesome people of Grey Castle, but I didn't expect them to be so unreliable. Both sides are monsters, just that one side is more savage," Talos Murray replied expressionlessly. Half of his face was hidden under his bandana, and several scars extended from the shadows, like earthworms entrenched under his skin. "However, without the support of the nobles, the Wimbledon family will lose everything they have sooner or later. We don't have to worry about that." At this point, he looked at the people queuing up, and his tone became more sinister. "We have enough people to deal with, that's true." Negan was also excited. "Anyone who defers to Grey Castle is our enemy. We have to make them pay a price. But we have to endure it for now." Talos pressed on his shoulder. "Once dawn arrives, we can hunt however we want." Even though the demons would never mention their defeat, it was an indisputable fact that the number of monsters stationed in Everwinter was decreasing. Compared to the ignorant commoners, the nobles could always find out news from the front lines if they wanted to. After knowing that the demons from Hell were no match for the people of Grey Castle, Panic had already spread among the nobles. As a knight, Talos did not have as many burdens as the nobles. He was not willing to risk his life for these ugly races, and it was even more impossible for him to defer to Grey Castle, who had a grudge against him. Since there was no way out in Everwinter, it was wiser for him to head south to the territories that the people of Grey Castle had yet to take control of. Of course, things like hunting refugees could be done anywhere. He still had a lot of time to take revenge, or rather, enjoy himself. Unknowingly, he had fallen in love with the feeling of being in control of everything. Listening to the refugees beg for mercy, roll around, and wail under the hooves of the horses was simply irresistible. Every time he bathed in the warm, fresh blood, even the old wounds on his face would fade a lot, as if they were responding to this sacrifice. Since it was impossible to revive his family, he might as well enjoy the hard-earned pleasure. And there was nothing more worth looking forward to in this world. Bookseller's website. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.